The silver cup felt cold and heavy in Elara's hands. It was too ornate, too precious for someone like her. The dark liquid inside swirled, catching the flickering torchlight, and the sharp metallic scent of blood filled the air. Elder Kalen stood before her, his face a mask of stern judgment, his eyes like chips of flint. "Drink, Elara." His voice echoed in the vast, silent council chamber. "This will put an end to the whispers. This will prove once and for all what you truly are." Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She could feel the weight of dozens of stares, the collective breath held by the assembled wolves of the Silvermane pack. They looked at her with a mixture of pity, disgust, and a hungry curiosity. To them, she was a ghost, a half-breed servant girl who had no business standing before the High Council. For 19 years, she had been invisible, scrubbing floors and mending clothes, only noticed when someone needed a target for their frustration. "I don't understand," she whispered, hating the tremor in her own voice. "What will this prove?" A female elder, Lyra, with hair the color of winter frost, spoke from the dais. "The blood of a pure alpha carries the fire of dominance. For a true wolf, it burns like sunlight on the tongue. But for those without a pure lineage, for half-breeds, it tastes of nothing but copper and salt. So drink, child. Show us the truth of your bloodline." The crowd shifted, a rustle of anticipation. Elara saw faces she knew all too well. Kalen's son, Ronan, who had once accidentally spilled a pot of scalding wax on her hands. The Beta's daughter, Seraphina, who never missed an opportunity to mock her tattered clothes. And at the very back of the chamber, standing apart with an aura of unapproachable authority, was King Theron himself. The Alpha King of the Northern Wastes was a figure carved from legend. He stood taller than any other, his shoulders broad, his hair the deep black of a starless night. His eyes, a shifting, unsettling mix of storm gray and molten gold, were fixed on her. She could not read his expression, but she knew it must be contempt. It was all anyone ever showed her. "The blood is a gift from your king," Elder Kalen pressed, his voice dripping with false benevolence. "Given freely for this test. You would not refuse a direct offering from your sovereign, would you?" It was a trap, elegantly laid. A week ago, while cleaning the royal archives, Elara had overheard 2 visiting dignitaries plotting in hushed, venomous tones. They spoke of poison, of a coup during the next moon festival. Fearing for her king's life, she had reported it to the head steward. Instead of gratitude, she had been met with suspicion and accusation. They claimed she was the spy, that she had fabricated the story to cover her own treachery. This public trial was their way of unmasking her, of proving she was the worthless creature they had always believed her to be. A cold resolve settled in her chest. She had nothing left to lose. Her mother was long gone, taken by a rogue attack when Elara was just a child. Her father was a nameless shadow, a story her mother would never tell. She had no friends, no allies, no one who would weep when she was gone. "I will drink it," Elara said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. She lifted the chalice. The first drop touched her tongue, and her world shattered. It was not fire, it was a storm. It was the first crack of lightning in a dead sky, the thaw of a frozen river. A power, ancient and vast, erupted within her. It raced through her veins, not like fire, but like liquid sunlight, awakening every dormant cell, every hidden part of her soul. The blood tasted of pine forests after rain, of deep earth and wild magic, of a power so old it felt like the beginning of time. She gasped, and the chalice fell from her numb fingers. It clattered on the stone floor, the blood spreading in a dark, accusing stain. But no one was looking at the cup. All eyes were on her. A soft, golden light began to pulse beneath her skin. It started in her hands, tracing the paths of her veins up her arms, a network of living sunlight. The glow spread across her collarbones, down her torso, illuminating the simple, coarse fabric of her servant's dress, until it seemed woven from strands of dawn. Someone in the crowd cried out in shock. Chairs scraped against stone as people recoiled. The serene silence of the chamber fractured into a cacophony of gasps and fearful murmurs. "Impossible," Elder Kalen breathed, his face ashen. "This cannot be. She is a nobody." But the light only intensified. Elara felt something uncoiling deep within her spirit, something powerful and wild that had been sweeping for a lifetime. Her wolf. She had always been able to shift, but it had been a painful, clumsy process. Her form always small, weak, and broken. Now, her wolf rose, not as a separate entity, but as the other half of her whole soul. Strong and magnificent and filled with a righteous fury, the shift took her without conscious thought. It was not the agonizing breaking of bones she was used to, but a fluid, powerful realignment. Her dress tore as her body expanded. Golden fur erupting across her skin, she landed on 4 powerful paws, and the wolf that stood in the center of the council chamber was a creature of myth. She was massive, her fur the color of spun gold, each strand seeming to hold its own inner light. When she raised her head, her eyes blazed with the same brilliant gold that now coursed through her being. Pandemonium erupted. Wolves shifted instinctively in response to the overwhelming, unknown power she radiated. Snarls and the scrape of claws filled the air. Then a roar silenced everything. It was the sound of absolute authority, of dominance that demanded submission. It was King Theron. His shift was a blur of motion, and the wolf that now stood where the king had been was a beast of shadow and majesty. His fur was black as polished obsidian, his eyes the same shifting gray and gold. He stalked forward through the cowering wolves, his gaze locked on Elara. Every instinct, every law of their world demanded that she lower her head, that she bare her throat to her alpha, her king. But the golden wolf did not bow. She stood her ground, meeting his powerful gaze without a flicker of fear. And then the impossible happened. King Theron's massive wolf, the apex predator of the entire northern wastes. And then the impossible happened. Slowly lowered his great head. His front legs bent, and he pressed his muzzle to the cold stone floor. In a gesture of profound and unmistakable reverence, he bowed to her. The chamber was so silent. Elara could hear the frantic beating of her own heart. Her wolf took a cautious step forward. She could feel it now, a new awareness thrumming between them, a bond that had sparked to life the moment his blood had touched her lips. It was more than power recognizing power. It was something deeper, something written in the stars themselves. Fated mates, the king of the northern wastes and the half-breed servant were fated mates. Theron shifted back to his human form in a fluid motion, rising to his feet. Someone hurriedly handed him a cloak, which he fastened around his waist, his eyes wide with a shock that mirrored her own. Remained fixed on her. "My queen," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she could not name. "Forgive me. I was blind. I should have known." Elara shifted back, suddenly conscious of her nakedness. A guard swiftly draped a cloak over her shoulders. She stood trembling, the world spinning around her. "I don't understand," she stammered, clutching the cloak tightly. "What am I?" "You are my mate," Theron said, his voice gaining strength as he moved closer. "But you are also, unless the legends lie, the last descendant of the Oracle line." A wave of gasps swept through the room. The Oracle line, the ancient seers, the advisors to kings, gifted with visions of truth and futures yet unwritten. They were said to have been wiped out centuries ago, hunted by those who feared their sight. "That is a fantasy, my king," Lyra protested, her voice shrill. "The oracles are extinct." This girl's mother was a low-born she-wolf who died in the wilds. Her mother, Theron countered, his gaze never leaving Elara, was likely in hiding, protecting her daughter from those who would slaughter an oracle child before her powers could awaken. He turned his fierce gaze upon the council. "You swore to me that every member of this pack would be treated with dignity. That under my rule, lineage would not dictate worth, and yet this woman, my mate, has been treated as less than nothing for her entire life within the very walls of my own home." Elder Kalen found his voice, though it was laced with panic. "Your Majesty, she is a half-breed. We had no way of knowing her true nature. You had every opportunity to see her as a person." Theron's voice cracked through the chamber like a whip. "You chose not to." "Because it is easier to have someone to despise, is it not? Someone to punish for simply existing." He took Elara's hand. The touch was electric, sending a fresh wave of warmth through her. The mate bond hummed between them. A tangible, unbreakable thread of destiny. This woman saved my life when she reported the assassination plot. Instead of honoring her courage, you arrested her. You accused her of treason. You subjected her to this spectacle, hoping to confirm she was as worthless as you needed her to be. "Your Majesty," Kalen began, but Theron raised a hand. "Silence." The alpha command in that single word was so potent it physically stifled the elder's protest. "Elara is not only an oracle. She is not only my fated mate." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a dawning awe. "That golden light, it is the mark of a true alpha. A power that does not bow because it was born to lead. She is your queen, and she will be treated as such. Anyone who fails in this, we answer directly to me." The words washed over Elara, a tidal wave of impossible truths. Oracle, true alpha, queen. Just hours ago, she was on her hands and knees, scrubbing mud from the great hall floor. Now she was standing before them all, her hand in the king's, her destiny rewritten in a single, terrifying, glorious moment. Now she was standing before them all, her hand in the king's, her destiny rewritten in a single, terrifying, glorious moment. She looked at the faces of the wolves who had tormented her, who had looked through her as if she were made of glass. A fear in their eyes was a potent thing, but it was not enough. "I want justice," she heard herself say, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension in the room. "Not for myself alone, for every person who has ever been made to feel invisible. I want their crimes acknowledged." Theron squeezed her hand, his support unwavering. "Then you shall have it. We will hear every testimony. We will right every wrong." He turned to the stunned assembly, his expression hardening into that of the unchallenged king. "The old ways end now. This woman is your queen. Honor her." As the implications of his words settled over the pack, Elara felt a strange calm descend upon her. The frightened servant girl was gone, shattered by the king's blood and the golden light of her own awakening. What emerged from the pieces was someone new. Someone who had been forged in hardship and was now tempered by a power she was only beginning to understand. They had demanded she taste the Alpha King's blood, expecting her to fall. Instead, she had found her throne. The silence that followed King Theron's declaration was heavier than any noise. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of shock and disbelief. Elara could feel the weight of it pressing down on the assembled wolves. On the elders, on her own shoulders. Her hand was still nestled in Theron's, a point of contact that felt both alien and like the only solid thing in a world that had just tilted off its axis. Queen. The word echoed in her mind, a foreign title for a girl who owned nothing but the clothes on her back and the scars on her skin. She looked at the faces in the crowd. Ronan, his usual smugness replaced by a pale, sickly fear. Seraphina, her beautiful features twisted in a mask of pure, undiluted envy. They were all staring at her, but they were not seeing the servant girl anymore. They were seeing the golden light that had pulsed beneath her skin. They were seeing the wolf that had not bowed. Theron's voice, though quiet, carried through the vast chamber with unwavering authority. "The council is dismissed. We will reconvene at dawn to begin the proceedings for justice that our queen has demanded." He did not wait for a response. His grip on her hand tightened slightly, a silent question, a steady anchor. "Come," he murmured, his tone for her alone. "You need rest." He led her from the dais, his body a shield between her and the stunned. Silent crowd. They parted for him, for them, a sea of wolves stepping back with bowed heads and averted eyes. The walk from the council chamber through the winding stone corridors of the pack house was a blur. Elara's legs felt numb, her mind reeling. She saw familiar sights, the tapestry she had mended last winter, the crack in the flagstone she always tripped over, the scent of pine and hearth smoke that was the scent of home, yet had never felt like it belonged to her. Now it all looked different. She was different. They arrived at a set of heavy, ornately carved wooden doors she had only ever cleaned, never entered. The king's private quarters. Theron pushed them open and guided her inside. The room was spacious and elegant, but surprisingly austere. A large fireplace dominated one wall, a low fire crackling within. There were shelves filled with books and scrolls. A large oak desk and a wide window that looked out over the moonlit forests of the northern wastes. It was a room of power, but also of solitude. It felt like him. "Please, sit," Theron said, guiding her toward a large, upholstered chair by the fire. She sank into it, the softness of the fabric a stark contrast to the rough straw pallet in the servants' quarters. He knelt before her, his stormy eyes searching her face with an intensity that was both unsettling and mesmerizing. "Elara," he began, his voice low and earnest, "I know this is beyond comprehension. I know you have no reason to trust me or any of us. I've been king for 6 years, and in all that time, I never saw you. I never saw the suffering happening under my own roof. For that, I am deeply and truly sorry. It is a failure I can never undo." His apology was so raw, so genuine, it caught her off guard. She had expected command, perhaps possessiveness, but not this, humility. "You are the king," she said softly, stating the fact that had defined her entire life. "You were not meant to see someone like me." "That is no excuse," he insisted, his jaw tightening. "A true king sees all his people. I failed in my duty long before I knew you were my mate. I failed you." The mate bond. She could feel it now. A steady, warm hum in her chest. A connection that seemed to breathe in time with her own heartbeat. It was a comforting presence, yet it terrified her. Her whole life she had belonged to no one. Now she was irrevocably tied to the most powerful wolf in the territory. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Now," he said, "you rest. A healer will come to see you. Then you will sleep. Tomorrow we face the council, together." As if on cue, a soft knock came at the door. An elderly she-wolf entered, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. She carried a basket of herbs and tinctures. "Your Majesty," she said, dipping her head to Theron. Then her warm gaze fell upon Elara. "My queen, I am Rowena. May I examine you?" Elara nodded mutely. Theron moved to stand by the fireplace, giving them space, but remaining a watchful presence. Rowena's hands were gentle and capable as she checked Elara's pulse, looked into her eyes, and carefully catalogued the old scars and faint bruises that marred her skin. With each one, Elara saw Theron's posture grow stiffer, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "The awakening has been a great shock to your system." "Child," Rowena said finally, her voice filled with a motherly concern that made Elara's throat tighten. "Your power was suppressed for a very long time. Its release is both a blessing and a trial. You need rest." Good food and peace. She shot a meaningful look at Theron. No more shocks for a while. Theron gave a curt nod. She will have it. After Rowena left, promising to return with a tonic, an awkward silence descended. Elara sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket Theron had given her, acutely aware that she was alone with the king, her mate, the man whose blood had unlocked a destiny she never knew was hers. "You should take the bed," Theron said, gesturing to the large canopied bed on the far side of the room. "I will sleep in the adjoining study. You are safe here, Elara. I give you my word. No one will harm you again." He began to move away, and a sudden, sharp panic lanced through her. The thought of being alone in this vast, unfamiliar room was suddenly more terrifying than facing the entire council. "Wait," he turned back, his expression questioning. I She struggled to find the words. I don't understand any of this. How can we be mates? We are strangers. He walked back toward her, his movements careful, as if approaching a skittish animal. The bond of fate does not require prior acquaintance. It recognizes a compatibility of souls, but you're right, we are strangers. The bond is a beginning, not a command. We do not have to act on it immediately. We can take all the time you need to become acquainted, to build trust. The connection will be there, whether we acknowledge it today or in a year. His respect for her autonomy was disarming. And what do you want? She asked, her curiosity overcoming her fear. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze intense. I want, he said carefully, to give you the choices you have been denied your entire life. You will set the pace of this, Elara. You will decide what this bond comes to mean. I will wait for you for as long as it takes. It was the perfect answer, and it settled something restless inside her. She nodded, a wave of exhaustion finally crashing over her. Thank you. He offered her a small pause. Genuine smile. Rest now. Tomorrow is a new day. He left her then, closing the door to the study softly behind him. Elara sat by the fire for a long time, listening to the crackle of the logs and the distant howl of a wolf on the wind. She looked at her hands, half expecting to see the golden light again. It was gone, but she could still feel it, a dormant sun nestled in her core. She was a true alpha, an oracle, a queen. The titles felt like ill-fitting clothes. But as she finally rose and walked to the bed, slipping between the impossibly soft sheets, she felt a tiny, fragile seed of hope take root in her heart. For the first time in her life, her future was not written in the dust at her feet. It was a blank page, waiting for her to write the first word. Across the room, on the desk, she noticed a small, polished stone that shone in the firelight. It was a simple thing, out of place among the kingly artifacts. She remembered polishing that very stone weeks ago, finding it smooth and pretty while cleaning the great hall. She had left it on a windowsill, thinking no one would notice it was gone. But someone had noticed, and someone had kept it. As sleep finally claimed her, Elara held on to that small, inexplicable detail. It was a mystery, a tiny thread in the vast, tangled web of her new life. And for the first time, she was not afraid to see where it led. Dawn broke over the Silvermane stronghold, its pale light filtering through the large window of the king's chambers. Elara awoke with a start, the unfamiliar softness of the bed and the lingering scent of pine and kingly soap disorienting her. For a single, heart-stopping moment, she expected to see the rough-hewn wooden beams of the servants' loft, to hear the familiar sounds of the kitchen staff beginning their day below. But the silence here was deep and profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind outside. But the silence here was deep and profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind outside. The events of the previous day crashed down upon her, not as a dream, but as a solid, unchangeable reality. The chalice, the blood, the golden light, the bow. She sat up, pushing the heavy blankets aside, and looked at her hands. They looked the same, slender, calloused from years of work, but she could feel the difference. A new energy hummed just beneath her skin, a quiet, potent force waiting to be called upon. A soft knock came at the main door, not the one to Theron's study. Before she could answer, it opened, and a young she-wolf, perhaps a year or two younger than her, entered. She carried a bundle of dark blue fabric, and her eyes were wide with a mixture of awe and nervousness. "My queen," the girl whispered, dipping into a deep curtsy. "I am Lyra." "The king sent me. I've brought you something to wear." Elara recognized her. This was the same girl who worked in the laundry, the one who had once secretly mended a tear in Elara's only spare tunic without being asked. She had never spoken a word to Elara, but the small act of kindness had been a beacon in a dark time. "Thank you, Lyra," Elara said, her voice still rough with sleep. "Please, just Elara is fine." Lyra looked horrified. "Oh, I couldn't, my queen. It wouldn't be proper." She laid the bundle on the bed. It was a dress, simple in cut but made of a soft, sturdy wool, dyed a deep, rich blue like the twilight sky. It was the most beautiful garment Elara had ever seen. The king said you would need something suitable for the council gathering. As Elara slipped the dress over her head, the fabric felt whisper soft against her skin. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She ran her hands down the smooth front, a strange feeling swelling in her chest. It was the feeling of being seen, of being considered. The door to the study opened and Theron emerged. He was already dressed in his formal attire, a dark tunic embroidered with the silver sigil of the wolf. His eyes found her immediately, and for a moment he just looked at her, a quiet, unreadable expression on his face. "The blue suits you," he said, his voice neutral, though she thought she saw a flicker of something warmer in his gaze. "Are you ready?" The question was simple, but its weight was immense. Was she ready to face the council? To face the wolves who had tormented her? To stand before them all, not as a victim, but as a queen demanding justice? "No," Elara said honestly, meeting his eyes. "But I will go anyway." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That is the only way to be ready for anything." He offered her his arm. "Then let us go." A walk to the throne room was a journey through a world transformed. Where yesterday there had been stunned silence, today there were whispers. Wolves stopped and bowed as they passed, their eyes darting from their king to her with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and for some, a dawning respect. She saw Lyra from the laundry watching from a corridor, a small, hopeful smile on her face. It was a tiny thing, but it felt like a foothold. The great doors to the throne room were open. The room was packed, every high-ranking member of the pack present, along with representatives from outlying villages. The air was thick with tension. At the center of the dais were two thrones. The larger one, Pete, carved from the heart of a great oak, was Theron's. Beside it stood a new throne, slightly smaller but no less imposing, crafted from pale, polished birch wood. It had not been there yesterday. Theron led her up the steps. He took his seat, then gestured to the empty throne beside him. "Your seat, my queen." Elara's legs felt like water, but she forced herself to move. She sat, the smooth, cool wood of the throne, firm beneath her. She placed her hands on the armrests, straightened her back, and lifted her chin. She would not let them see her fear. "Let this gathering commence." Theron's voice rang out, silencing the murmurs. We are here to bear witness to the testimony of Queen Elara, to hear the account of crimes committed against her, and to begin the process of justice. All eyes turned to her. She could feel the hostility radiating from Elder Kalin, the cold calculation from Lyra the Elder, the sheer hatred from Ronan and Seraphina in the crowd. But she also felt Theron's steady presence beside her, a pillar of strength. And she felt that new golden power inside her, waiting. "Speak, Elara," Theron said, his voice softening just for her. "Tell them your truth." And so she did. She began to speak. Her voice started softly, but as she continued, it grew stronger, fueled by a lifetime of swallowed pain. She did not shout or weep. She spoke with a quiet, devastating clarity. She told them of the endless chores, the missed meals, the cold nights. She spoke of the accidents, the tripping on the stairs that had sprained her ankle, the misplaced bucket of water that had drenched her in the dead of winter. She named names. She described the day Ronan had deliberately swung a practice sword into her path, bruising her ribs so badly she could barely breathe for a week. She recounted the times Seraphina and her friends had cornered her in the linen closet, their taunts sharp as knives, locking her in the darkness for hours. She spoke of the loneliness, the crushing weight of being unseen, of being treated as less than the dust beneath their feet. She looked directly at Elder Kalin as she described reporting smaller injustices to him, only to be dismissed with a wave of his hand and told she was being overly sensitive. The throne room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Some wolves looked at the floor, shame coloring their features. Others stared at the accused, their expressions hardening. When she finished, the silence stretched, heavy and profound. Theron was the one to break it. He stood, his presence seeming to fill the entire room. "I have heard enough." His voice was like winter frost. "The accused will step forward." End. One by one, they were pushed to the front of the crowd by the king's guards. Ronan, his face pale and sweaty. Seraphina, her beautiful face contorted in a sneer that could not hide her fear. Others, lesser bullies who had followed their lead. "The evidence is undeniable," Theron declared. "You have preyed upon someone you perceived as weak. You have brought shame upon this pack and upon my rule." He looked at Ronan. "For your acts of physical violence, you are stripped of your rank and will be assigned to border patrol in the frozen reaches for no less than 2 years. There, you will learn the true meaning of hardship." Ronan flinched as if struck. Theron's gaze fell upon Seraphina. "For your cruelty and your role in fostering a culture of malice, you are banished from the main pack house. You will serve in the healing huts, tending to those you once deemed beneath you, until you can prove you have learned compassion," he continued, meting out punishments that were firm, but, Elara noted with a strange pang, not needlessly cruel. They were meant to teach, to reform. Finally, he turned to Elder Kalin. "And you," Theron said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm, "you, who are entrusted with the welfare of all pack members, looked away. You enabled this cruelty through your willful ignorance. You are hereby removed from the council. Your wealth and holdings are forfeit, to be distributed as restitution to the one you wronged." Kalin's face crumpled. "Your Majesty, I beg you, silence!" Theron's command was absolute. Your voice is no longer welcome in these halls. He then turned to address the entire assembly. These crimes did not happen in isolation. They are the symptom of a sickness that has festered in our pack for too long. A sickness that values purity of blood over purity of heart. That ends today. He paused, letting his words sink in. The old council is dissolved. I will appoint a new one with half of its seats reserved for those of non-noble birth, for those who have known struggle and survived it. Furthermore, Queen Elara will establish a new guardianship, a group of wolves answerable only to her, tasked with protecting the vulnerable and rooting out injustice wherever it is found. She will have the full authority of the crown to see this done. A wave of shock rippled through the room. He was not just punishing a few individuals. He was dismantling the very structure that had allowed such cruelty to thrive. He was giving her real, tangible power. Elara felt a surge of something fierce and protective. This was not just about her anymore. It was about every invisible person in the territory. Theron looked at her, his gaze asking a silent question. She gave a slight, firm nod. He turned back to the pack. These are the new laws of the Silvermane Pack. Those who cannot abide by them may leave our territory, but those who stay will honor them, and they will honor their queen. His final words were not a request. They were a decree. As the assembly was dismissed, the wolves filed out in a hushed, sober silence. The world they knew irrevocably changed. Later, back in the royal chambers, Elara stood by the window, watching the moon rise over the forest. The day had been a whirlwind of emotion and upheaval. You gave me too much power, she said to Theron, who was standing by the fireplace. They will resent me for it. They already resented you, he replied calmly. Now they must also respect you. And you have earned that power, Elara. You survived their world. Now you get to build a better one. She turned to face him. I saw something today. During the trial, it was like threads, golden threads connecting people. I could see who was lying, who was telling a half-truth. 3 of the wolves who testified against Ronan were lying to protect themselves. They were just as guilty. Theron's expression grew sharp, interested. Their names? She told him. He nodded slowly. We will investigate. Justice does not end with one day's reckoning. He moved to stand beside her at the window. This sight of yours, the oracle gift, it is awakening. It's terrifying, she confessed, looking down at her hands. I don't know how to control it. Then we will learn together, he said, one day at a time. As they stood in silence, watching the stars emerge, one by one, in the vast, dark sky, Elara felt the first stirrings of a new purpose. The path ahead was shrouded in mist, filled with enemies and challenges she could not yet imagine. But she was no longer walking it alone. She had a partner. She had a crown. And for the first time, she had the power to ensure that no one else would have to endure the shadows as she had. The servant girl was gone. The queen was just beginning to learn how to rule. The days that followed the council were a strange and disorienting blur for Elara. Her world had been reduced to a small, manageable orbit within the king's wing of the pack house. Her world had been reduced to a small, manageable orbit within the king's wing of the pack house. Rowena was a frequent visitor, her tonics bitter but effective, and her presence a calming constant. Under her care, The lingering ache in Elara's bones from the power awakening began to fade, replaced by a steady, humming vitality. Theron was true to his word. He did not press her about the mate bond. Their interactions were respectful. Often conducted in the presence of others, he consulted her on matters of the new guardianship, asking for her thoughts on the qualities they should seek in its members. He brought her scrolls detailing the histories of the outlying packs, patiently answering her questions about the complex politics of the northern wastes. It was an education, and he was a quiet, demanding teacher. He was building a foundation of trust, brick by careful brick. And she found herself increasingly grateful for it. Yet, a restlessness grew within her. The four walls of the royal chambers, once a symbol of unimaginable luxury, began to feel like a gilded cage. She was a queen in name, but she was still living in a state of suspension, shielded from the very pack she was meant to rule. One afternoon, as Theron was reviewing a map with one of his scouts, she finally spoke her mind. "I need to leave these rooms." Both men looked up, surprised. Theron's brow furrowed with immediate concern. "Elara, it's not safe. The pack is still unsettled. There is resentment." "I know," she interrupted, her voice firm. "But I cannot lead from a place of hiding. If I am to be their queen, they need to see me, and I need to see them. I need to walk the grounds. I need to breathe the air." The scout, a grizzled older wolf named Borin, watched the exchange with keen interest. Baron studied her face, his gaze searching for any trace of fear. He found only resolve. "Very well," he conceded, though his reluctance was palpable. "But Borin and I will accompany you." The main courtyard of the stronghold was a hub of activity. Wolves trained with weapons, children chased each other between the buildings, and she-wolves gathered near the well, sharing news as they drew water. As Elara stepped out into the sunlight, flanked by Theron and Borin, the bustling scene faltered. Conversations died mid-sentence. All movements ceased. Dozens of pairs of eyes locked onto her, wide and uncertain. She felt the weight of their stares, like a physical pressure. She saw the suspicion in some, the curiosity in others, and in a few, a flicker of the same old contempt, now carefully masked. She forced her shoulders back and kept her head high, walking with a purpose she did not entirely feel. They passed the training grounds where Ronan had once taunted her. A young, lanky wolf was practicing alone with a wooden sword, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. As they drew nearer, he fumbled the weapon, and it clattered to the ground, rolling to a stop at Elara's feet. The boy froze, his face draining of all color. He looked from the sword at the queen's feet to King Theron's impassive face, pure terror in his eyes. He was waiting for anger, for punishment. Elara bent down, picked up the wooden sword, and held it out to him. "Your grip is too tight," she said, her voice calm. "You're holding it like an axe. A sword is an extension of your arm, not a club. Loosen your fingers." The boy stared at her, utterly bewildered. He took the sword back with trembling hands, his mouth agape. "Try again," she said softly. He nodded, mutely, and adjusted his grip. His next swing was smoother, more controlled. A look of stunned realization crossed his face. "Thank you, my queen," he stammered, bowing so deeply he almost toppled over. She offered him a small, genuine smile before moving on. She didn't look back, but she could feel the shift in the air behind her. The silence was now one of contemplation, not just shock. They moved on, toward the healing huts on the far side of the compound. As they approached, Elara saw Seraphina. She was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the stone steps leading into the main hut, her fine clothes replaced with a simple, rough-spun shift. Her beautiful hair was tied back in a messy knot. She looked up as they approached, and her eyes, filled with a venomous hatred, locked directly onto Elara. Theron tensed beside her, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Boren took a half-step forward, ready to intervene, but Elara simply stopped and looked at Seraphina. She didn't speak. She didn't glare. She just looked, her expression neutral, her gaze steady. It was Seraphina who broke first, the sheer, unnerving calm in Elara's eyes was more powerful than any anger. It was the gaze of a queen who no longer needed to prove her worth to the likes of her. Seraphina's face flushed a deep, humiliated red, and she dropped her eyes, returning to her scrubbing with a frantic, jerky energy. They continued their walk in silence for a while longer. As they turned a corner near the kitchens, a small, frantic commotion caught their attention. A young mother was crying, clutching a squirming bundle to her chest, while several other women looked on helplessly. "My baby, he won't stop, he's burning up," the woman sobbed. Rowena was away gathering herbs. The panic was genuine and contagious. Without a second thought, Elara moved toward her, Theron and Boren following closely. "Let me see," Elara said, her voice gentle but firm. The woman, recognizing her queen, hesitated for only a moment before the fear for her child overrode protocol. She loosened her grip, revealing a feverish infant, his face flushed, his cries weak and raspy. Elara reached out, not with her hands, but with that new sense inside her. She closed her eyes for a second, and the world dissolved into a web of golden threads. She saw the vibrant, the weakened thread of the baby's life force, and she saw the sickness. A dark, pulsing knot of infection in his tiny lungs. It was a clear, terrifying image. "He has an infection," Elara said, her eyes snapping open. "In his chest, it's tightening his breathing. He needs yarrow and honey for the fever, and Timestein to help him breathe. Now," her voice held such absolute certainty that for a moment, everyone just stared. Then the kitchen staff sprang into action, scrambling to find the herbs. The mother looked at Elara, tears of a different kind now streaming down her face. "How did you know?" Elara just shook her head slightly, placing a comforting hand on the woman's arm. "He will be all right. Just make sure he gets the steam." As they walked away, leaving the relieved mother and the bustling kitchen staff behind, Theron looked at her, his expression a mixture of awe and deep concern. "You saw it," he stated quietly. "The sickness itself." "It was like a dark thread choking his light," Elara whispered, the image still vivid behind her eyes. The use of her power left her feeling slightly dizzy, but also profoundly connected. She had helped, truly helped. When they returned to the royal chambers, the setting sun painted the room in hues of orange and gold. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with a new understanding. "You were remarkable today," Theron said, breaking the quiet. "You faced their fear and you did not flinch. You turned it into respect, and you saved a child." Elara looked out the window, watching the shadows lengthen across the courtyard. I was so afraid to go out there. But staying hidden was a different kind of fear. I think I prefer facing the one I can fight. That, Theron said, a note of deep pride in his voice, is the heart of a true ruler. That night, for the first time, Elara dreamed not of her past humiliations, but of threads. A vast, shimmering tapestry of golden light, connecting every wolf, every tree, every stone in the territory. She saw strong, bright threads, and weak, fraying ones, and in the distance she saw a darkness, a patch where the threads were being deliberately snipped and tangled. It was a warning, a cold whisper of a threat that had nothing to do with petty bullying or past grievances. It was something older and far more dangerous. She awoke with a gasp. The vision seared into her mind. The peace of the previous day was gone, replaced by a chilling certainty. Their struggles had only just begun. The real enemy was still out there, waiting in the shadows, and it was watching them. The crisp, pine-scented air of the following morning did little to dispel the chilling residue of Elara's dream. The vibrant golden tapestry of interconnected lives and that ominous, encroaching darkness snipping at its edges felt more real to her than the soft wool blankets she pushed aside. She rose from the bed, her movements quiet and deliberate, and walked to the large window. Below, the Silvermane's stronghold was slowly stirring to life. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer rang through the clear air. It all looked so peaceful, so normal. Yet beneath the surface, she now knew with a certainty that chilled her bones. A malignancy was growing. Theron was already in the main chamber, standing over his large oak desk, which was strewn with maps and scrolls. He looked up as she entered, his keen eyes missing nothing. "You did not sleep well," he observed, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't an accusation, merely a statement of fact. The mate bond, she was learning, was a subtle conduit of emotion, a shared weather system between their two souls. "I had a vision," she said, her voice still husky with sleep and unease. She wrapped her arms around herself. Though the room was not cold. It was not like yesterday, with the baby. That was a single thread, a clear problem. This was everything, all of us connected, and something was trying to tear it apart. She described it to him in halting sentences, the beautiful, complex web of light, each thread a life, a destiny, a connection to the pack and the land. She spoke of the chilling, void-like patch where the threads were not just broken, but being actively severed, the light devoured by a hunger she could not name. Theron listened in utter silence, his expression growing graver with each word. When she finished, he let out a long, slow breath. "The Oracle's sight is a gift of foresight and truth," he said, moving to the fireplace to pour her a cup of tea from a pot keeping warm on the hearth. "It does not show you what is, but what may be, a possible future, a warning." He handed her the warm clay cup. "This darkness you saw, did you recognize any of the threads it was touching? Any location?" He handed her the warm clay cup. "This darkness you saw, did you recognize any of the threads it was touching? Any location?" Elara closed her eyes, trying to grasp the fading images. "It was to the north. Beyond our borders. The threads there were thinner, more scattered. It was like the web was weakest there. That's where the darkness was gathering." She opened her eyes, a new fear dawning. The outlying packs, the ones who have had the least contact with the stronghold, they are the most vulnerable. Theron's jaw tightened. He returned to his desk, his finger tracing a path on one of the larger maps. The Frostfang clan. They dwell in the high crags of the Serpent's Tooth Mountains. They are a proud, isolated people. They have always been slow to accept rule from the stronghold, even under my father. He looked at her, his stormy eyes serious. If an enemy wanted to weaken the northern wastes, to fracture us from within, they would start with the Frostfangs. Turning them against us would be a masterstroke. A plan began to form in Elara's mind. Fragile but insistent. We cannot wait for this threat to come to us. We cannot sit in this stronghold reacting to shadows. A queen who is only seen in a throne room is not a queen who understands her people. Theron studied her, a flicker of understanding in his gaze. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting we do not summon the Frostfang Alpha to us, she said, her voice gaining strength with her conviction. I am suggesting we go to him. We show them that their king and queen do not hide behind stone walls. We show them that we are willing to walk the difficult paths to secure their loyalty and protect their lives. The journey to the Serpent's Tooth is not a casual ride, Theron countered. Though she could see the idea appealing to the warrior in him. The passes are treacherous and the weather turns in a heartbeat. It would take us the better part of a week to reach their main settlement. All the more reason to go, Elara insisted. If my vision is true, then we do not have the luxury of time. We must strengthen the wed where it is weakest. We must show our presence before the darkness can poison them against us. She could feel his internal debate through the bond, the king's caution warring with the alpha's instinct to meet a challenge head-on. He looked from her determined face to the map, his finger still resting on the mountainous region. Your safety, he began, is intertwined with the safety of every wolf in this territory, she finished for him. I'm not a treasure to be locked away, Theron. I am a weapon you have not yet learned to wield. This gift, this sight, it is for this, for seeing the cracks before they become chasms. Let me use it. Her words hung in the air between them, a bold declaration. She was no longer asking for permission. She was stating her role. She was the Oracle Queen, and her place was at the forefront of this coming storm, not sheltered from it. A slow, approving smile touched Theron's lips, a rare and transformative sight. When you first stood in the council chamber, glowing like a descended star, I saw your power. But now, Elara, I am beginning to see your strength. He nodded once, a decision made. We will go to the Frostfangs. We leave in 2 days' time. I will select a small elite guard. Boren will lead them. We travel fast and light. The preparations began in a flurry of controlled activity. Elara was swept into a new world of practicalities. She was measured for traveling clothes made of thick, weather-resistant leather and wool, a far cry from the servant's rags or the queen's formal dress. She was given a pair of sturdy fur-lined boots that felt like walking on clouds compared to her old, worn-out foot wraps. Theron personally oversaw the selection of their escort, 10 of his most trusted and seasoned warriors, including Boren. They were wolves of few words and grim competence, their respect for Elara evident in their curt nods and efficient obedience. She spent hours in the strategy room with Theron and Boren, learning the route, the potential dangers of the mountain passes, the customs and temperament of the Frostfang clan. It is a clan led by Alpha Caden, Theron explained, pointing to a rough sketch of a grin-faced man on the map. He values strength above all else. He will test you. He may even insult you to see how you react. You must not show weakness, but you must also not respond with open hostility. It is a delicate balance. Elara listened, absorbing every detail. This was not about memorizing courtly manners. It was about survival and diplomacy. She practiced holding herself with an air of unshakable calm, of speaking with a quiet authority that did not need to raise its voice. She was, in essence, preparing for the most important performance of her life. The night before their departure, a sense of momentous occasion settled over the stronghold. Elara stood before the full-length mirror in her chamber. The woman staring back was a stranger. Dressed in functional dark leathers, her hair braided back in a simple, practical style, she looked less like a queen and more like a warrior. A scout, but her eyes held a new light, a resolve that had been forged in the fires of her past and tempered by the weight of her future. There was a soft knock. It was Theron. He stood in the doorway, similarly clad in traveling gear, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, two partners bound by fate, standing on the precipice of the unknown. "Are you ready?" he asked, the same question he had posed before the council. This time, her answer was different. She looked at their reflection in the mirror, the powerful Alpha King and the Oracle Queen, side by side. "I am ready to face whatever awaits us," she said, her voice steady. "For the first time, I feel like I'm walking the path I was meant to walk." He offered her his hand, not as a king to a subject, but as one equal to another. "Then let us go and face the mountains." As they walked out into the courtyard where the guards and horses waited, the entire pack seemed to have gathered to see them off. They were silent, their faces a mixture of hope and anxiety. Elara mounted the sleek gray mare that had been chosen for her, her movements fluid and confident. She looked out over the sea of faces, her people, and felt a surge of protective fierceness. She might have been leaving the safety of the stronghold, but she was not running from her duty. She was running toward it. The darkness in her vision was a threat, but it was also a summons. The queen was riding to war, not with swords and fury, but with truth and a golden light that could see through any shadow. The journey to the serpent's tooth had begun. The world shrank to the rhythm of hooves on hard-packed earth and the whisper of the wind through the tall sentinel pines. The air itself changed as they journeyed north, leaving the relative mildness of the stronghold's valley behind. It grew sharper, thinner, carrying the clean, icy scent of snow from the distant peaks that now dominated the horizon. The Serpent's Tooth Mountains were not a gentle range. They were a jagged wall of granite and ice. Their peaks clawing at the sky like broken teeth. To Elara, they looked both terrifying and magnificent. She rode beside Theron at the head of their small column, with Borin and the other guards forming a protective diamond around them. The first day was a lesson in endurance. Muscles she never knew she had protested the long hours in the saddle. The constant vigilance, the scanning of the tree line for threats, was mentally exhausting. Yet with each mile that fell behind them, she felt a layer of the confined queen slough away, replaced by something wilder and more primal. Theron was a quiet presence, his eyes constantly moving, reading the forest. The sky, the very feel of the wind. He would point out things to her in a low voice. The track of a large mountain cat, the way the lichen grew thicker on the north side of the trees, the distant cry of an eagle that signaled clear weather ahead. It was another kind of education, one of the land itself. She listened, absorbing it all, feeling a deep, resonant connection to this untamed world that she had only ever seen from her window. On the second evening, they made camp in a sheltered gully beside a rushing, ice-cold stream. The guards worked with efficient silence, building a fire, tending to the horses, and establishing a watch rotation. Elara insisted on helping, gathering dry kindling and filling water skins, her actions initially causing a ripple of discomfort among the warriors, until a sharp look from Theron silenced their unspoken protests. She was their queen. But on this journey, she was also one of them. As dusk settled, painting the sky in shades of violet and deep orange, they gathered around the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the serious faces of the guards. The conversation was sparse, focused on the route for the next day. It was then that Boren, his grizzled face etched by firelight, spoke directly to Elara. The Frostfang settlement is built into the cliffs themselves. My queen, he said, poking the fire with a stick. The final approach is called the Stone Sentinel's Pass. It's a narrow path, barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast, with a sheer drop on one side. The Frostfangs use it as a natural defense. They'll have seen us coming for days. They'll be waiting. Will they see us as friends or foes? Elara asked, her gaze fixed on the hypnotic flames. Boren grunted. With Frostfangs, it's hard to say. They respect strength, but they're suspicious of outsiders. Your presence, if I may be blunt, will be a shock. They've likely heard the rumors by now. The servant girl who became queen. They will not know what to make of you. They will make of me what I show them, Elara replied, her voice calm. She looked up from the fire, her eyes reflecting the golden light. I am not bringing them pretty words or empty promises. I am bringing them a warning. The truth needs no posturing. Theron, who had been listening quietly, gave a slow nod of approval. That is the right approach. Caden despises flattery. He can smell fear and falsehood a mile away. He can smell fear and falsehood a mile away. Later, as the camp settled into sleep, Elara found she was not tired. The immensity of the star-strewn sky above, unobscured by the stronghold's lights, was breathtaking. She walked a short distance from the camp to the edge of the tree line and looked up at the mountains. They were a stark, black silhouette against the Milky Way's shimmering river of light. She closed her eyes and tentatively reached for her oracle sight. It came more easily now, like flexing a new muscle. The world dissolved into its hidden architecture. The threads were here too, but different. The connections between the guards were strong, bright cords of loyalty and shared purpose. Theron's thread was a brilliant, steady pillar of gold intertwined with her own in a complex, beautiful knot. But when she cast her perception north, toward the mountains, she saw it again. That patch of dissonance, the threads there were not just thin. They were murky, tarnished, as if a grimy film had been smeared over them. It wasn't the clear, cutting darkness of her dream, but a blight, a slow poison. She opened her eyes, her heart pounding. The threat was not some external army massing for an attack. It was a corruption already at work, a subtle influence turning hearts and minds. It was already there, among the Frostfangs. A presence behind her made her turn. It was Theron. He didn't speak, simply came to stand beside her, following her gaze toward the ominous peaks. "You feel it too," she whispered. It wasn't a question. He was silent for a long moment. "I feel a wrongness in the air, a tension that has nothing to do with the coming winter. My wolf is restless, eager to confront whatever is causing it." He looked down at her, his features softened by the starlight. "And you, what do you see?" "I see a sickness of the spirit," she said, the words feeling inadequate for the chilling vision. Their loyalty to the pack, their connection to each other, it's being eroded. Someone or something is whispering lies into their ears, and they are starting to believe them. "Then our arrival may be the spark that ignites a powder keg," Theron murmured, his voice grim. "Or the fresh wind that clears away the poison," Elara countered, turning to face him fully. "We cannot fear the confrontation, Theron. We must be the truth that shatters the lies." He studied her, this woman who had emerged from a life of shadows with the courage to stare down a mountain. The mate bond swelled between them, not with the heat of passion, but with a profound, steadfast respect. In that moment, they were not a king and his unexpected queen. They were two warriors standing shoulder to shoulder on the edge of the battlefield, ready to fight for their people with the only weapons that mattered: strength and truth. "Then we will be that wind," Theron said, his voice a low vow. "Together." The next morning, they broke camp before dawn. The air was so cold it felt like shards of glass in their lungs. As they began the arduous climb into the foothills of the Serpent's Tooth, the forest thinned, replaced by stunted, wind-twisted trees and vast fields of scree. The path grew steeper, more treacherous. The sound of the wind became a constant, mournful howl through the rocky crags. Elara said nothing, her focus entirely on the path ahead, on keeping her seat as her horse picked its way carefully over the unstable ground. She did not complain. She did not show a moment of fear. She could feel the watching eyes of the guards, their initial protective skepticism slowly transforming into genuine admiration. She was enduring the same hardships they were, without a word of privilege. By midday, they reached the entrance to the Stone Sentinel's Pass. It was exactly as Boren had described, a terrifyingly narrow ribbon of a path carved into the side of a colossal cliff face. 1,000-foot drop fell away to a raging river below, looking like a silver thread from this height. And there, at the far end of the pass, barely visible, were figures. Dozens of them, lining the cliff tops, watching their approach. The Frostfang clan was waiting. The test was about to begin. Elara took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the cool, thin air fill her lungs. She looked at Theron, and he gave her a single, confident nod. Then she nudged her horse forward, leading the way into the pass, her head held high, her heart a steady, determined drumbeat against the vast, silent judgment of the mountains. The wind in the Stone Sentinel's Pass was a living entity, a furious, shrieking force that tore at their clothes and whipped Elara's braided hair around her face. It seemed to carry the voices of the mountain itself, a chorus of warning and challenge. The path was even more treacherous up close, a jagged ledge of crumbling rock barely wide enough for their horses. One misstep, one startled reaction from their mounts, and it would be a long, fatal plunge to the river below. Elara kept her eyes fixed forward, on the distant figures waiting for them, but her entire being was focused on the rhythm of her horse's careful steps, on the feel of the reins in her gloved hands, on the absolute necessity of projecting calm. She could feel the weight of the Frostfang stairs from the cliffs above. It was a physical pressure, 100 pairs of eyes assessing their every move, looking for a sign of weakness, of fear. She did not look up at them. To look up would be to acknowledge their dominance over this place. Instead, she rode as if she had every right to be there, as if this terrifying path were nothing more than a garden walkway in her own domain. She could feel Theron's presence just behind her, a solid, unshakable rock in the face of the howling gale. His trust in her to lead this approach was a silent message to the watchers above, step by agonizingly slow step. They traversed the pass. The journey felt like it took hours, though in reality it was likely less than 30 minutes. As they neared the end, the path widened slightly, opening onto a broad, flat shelf of rock that served as a gateway to the Frostfang settlement. And there, blocking their way, stood a line of warriors. They were a stark, formidable people, dressed in heavy furs and leathers, stitched with bone and ivory. They were taller and broader than the wolves of the stronghold, their faces weathered by wind and cold into masks of grim endurance. Their eyes, pale blue or steely gray, held no welcome. In the center of the line stood their alpha, Caden. He was a giant of a man, even taller than Theron, with a thick, braided beard the color of iron, and a scar that ran from his forehead down across one eye, which was clouded and blind. His one good eye, a piercing pale blue, fixed on Elara with an intensity that felt like a physical blow. He did not look at Theron. His entire focus was on the woman who had dared to lead a king into his territory. The Silvermane guards fanned out behind Elara and Theron, their hands resting near their weapons, their postures tense and ready. The air crackled with unspoken threat. The only sound was the relentless wind. It was Elara who broke the silence. Her voice, though not loud, carried with a strange clarity, cutting through the wind's roar. "Alpha Caden, I am Elara. We have come a long way to speak with you." Caden's lip curled slightly. He still did not acknowledge Theron. "I know who you are," he said, his voice a low rumble like shifting stones. "The stories have traveled even to our high crags. The half-breed servant who bewitched the Silvermane king." He took a step forward, his massive frame looming. "You bring your pet king into my mountains. Why? Have you come to demand our fealty, to show us the power of your magic?" The word was dripping with contempt. Theron stirred beside her, a low growl building in his chest. Elara lifted a hand, a subtle gesture, and he stilled. She kept her eyes locked on Caden. "I bring no demands," she said, her tone even and calm, belying the frantic beating of her heart. "And I practice no magic that was not born in these very mountains, in the blood of the first wolves." She paused, letting her words hang in the icy air. I bring a warning, and I bring the truth. Caden scoffed, a harsh, grating sound. Warnings? Truth? We of the Frostfang clan need no coddling from the soft wolves of the valley. Our truth is written in the ice and stone. It is simple. The strong survive. The weak perish. An easy philosophy, Elara countered, her gaze never wavering from his single piercing eye. Until the threat is not one of strength against strength, but of poison in the ear, of lies that turn brother against brother. A clean death in battle is an honor. A slow death of the spirit, of betrayal from within, is a tragedy. Something flickered in Caden's good eye. A hint of unease, quickly masked by anger. You speak in riddles, girl. We have no poison here. We are strong. We are united. Are you? Elara asked softly. She took a step forward, now only a few paces from the towering Alpha. The Frostfang warriors tensed, but she ignored them. She was no longer looking at Caden's face, but at the space around him, at the web of threads only she could see. The murky, tarnished blight was here, thick and cloying. And she saw one thread, a dark, pulsing cord of influence, connecting Caden to a figure standing just behind his right shoulder. A gaunt, older wolf with deep-set eyes and a calculating stillness. I see the bonds that tie your clan together, Alpha Caden, Elara said, her voice taking on a new, resonant quality. It seemed to vibrate in the very air. I see the loyalty of your warriors, bright and strong. She gestured to the line of men. Then her gaze shifted to the gaunt man behind him, and I see the thread of a viper, whispering doubts into your ear, feeding your pride while he weakens your connections to the wider pack. He tells you that the Silvermane King is weak, that I am an abomination, that isolation is strength. But his true goal is not your independence. It is your destruction. The gaunt man, whom she now knew was the source of the blight, paled. His eyes widened in shock and fear. She lies. My Alpha. She seeks to divide us with her valley tricks. His eyes widened in shock and fear. She lies, my Alpha. She seeks to divide us with her valley tricks. But Caden was staring at Elara, his expression a storm of conflict. The absolute certainty in her voice. A way she had pinpointed his most trusted advisor, Jorik, without a moment's hesitation, was shaking the foundations of his certainty. What is your proof? Caden demanded, his voice losing some of its bluster. My proof is the truth I see, Elara said. She took another step, closing the distance between them. She was small before him, but she seemed to radiate an authority that had nothing to do with physical size. Look at him. Alpha Caden. Look at your advisor, Jorik. Can you not feel the rot? Can you not see how his counsel always leads to greater isolation, to greater suspicion of Theron's role? He does not make you stronger. He makes you alone, and a lone wolf, no matter how strong, is easy prey for the true enemy that gathers in the shadows. She turned her head, her golden-flecked eyes now pinning Jorik in place. He has been meeting with a rogue from the east. A wolf who carries the stench of dark magic. They plan to let that darkness into your clan, to use you as a weapon against the Silvermane, and when you are broken and used up, they will discard you. Jorik's face was a mask of terror. She is a witch! Kill her! But Caden did not move, He was looking at Jorik, really looking at him for the first time, remembering every whispered conversation, every piece of counsel that had stirred his resentment toward the stronghold. The pieces were falling into a terrible, undeniable picture. The silence that fell was deeper and more profound than any that had come before. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath. The fate of the Frostfang clan, and perhaps the entire northern wastes, hung in the balance on that windswept ledge. Alpha Caden, the mighty, unyielding leader of the mountain clan, slowly turned his head from his treacherous advisor to the small, dark-haired queen who stood fearlessly before him. The battle in his single eye was finally over. "Seize him," Caden commanded, his voice a low, deadly thunder. "Seize Jorik." The world narrowed to a ribbon of crumbling gray rock. The abyss and the screaming wind. The stone sentinel's pass was not merely a path, it was a trial by vertigo. The furious gale that tore through the mountain pass was a living, shrieking entity, plucking at their cloaks with icy fingers and whipping stinging particles of ice and grit into their faces. It carried 1,000 voices, the groan of ancient stone, the distant cry of hunting eagles, and a deeper, more ominous tone that felt like the mountain itself challenging their right to be there. Below, so far down, it made the mind reel. The silver thread river was a mere frothing ribbon of white, its roar muted by the vast distance into a constant, ghostly sigh. Elara guided her gray mare, Nimbus, with a calm she did not feel. Every instinct screamed at her to flatten herself against the horse's neck, to cling on for dear life. But she knew, with a certainty that went beyond thought, that to show fear here was to fail. The Frostfangs were watching from their perches high on the cliff faces, their figures dark and unmoving against the stark granite. She could feel their collective gaze like a physical weight, 100 pairs of cold, assessing eyes, measuring the width of her shoulders, the steadiness of her hands, the set of her jaw. They were looking for a flinch, a gasp, a moment of hesitation that would brand her as weak, as an outsider, as unworthy. So she became a statue of resolve. She kept her spine straight. Her shoulders squared against the buffeting wind. Her gaze was fixed not on the terrifying drop to her left, nor on the watching eyes above, but on the end of the pass, where the path widened onto a broad, rocky shelf. She focused on the rhythm of Nimbus's careful, deliberate steps, the crunch of hooves on gravel, the feel of the worn leather reins in her gloved hands. She breathed in the thin, sharp air, letting it fill her lungs and clear the panic from her mind. She was the queen of the northern wastes, and this was her land too, no matter how fiercely it tested her. Theron rode a half-length behind her. A silent, formidable shadow, his presence was a tangible force, a bulwark against the hostility of the place. She knew his wolf was bristling, every protective instinct screaming at him to take the lead, to shield her from whatever lay ahead. But he held back. His trust in her to lead this approach was a deliberate, powerful statement. He was the king, but she was the one they had come to see. She was the unknown variable, the oracle, and she had to prove her mettle on her own terms. The journey across the pass felt like an eternity, a slow-motion pilgrimage through a landscape of sheer terror and breathtaking beauty. The sun, pale and weak at this altitude, glinted off veins of quartz in the rock. Once a great shadow passed over them, and Elara looked up to see a golden eagle, its wingspan vast enough to blot out the sky, circling once before disappearing into the clouds. It felt like an omen. Finally, the ledge widened. The terrifying drop receded, replaced by a solid wall of rock, into which were carved the first entrances to the Frostfang settlement. Dark, gaping mouths adorned with ancient runes and hung with animal hides. The air here was still bitingly cold, but the wind's fury was broken by the natural amphitheater of stone, and there, arrayed across the shelf in a solid, unmoving line, were the Frostfang warriors. They were like figures carved from the mountain itself, clad in heavy pelts of white wolf and shaggy mountain goat. Their armor was reinforced with plates of boiled leather and polished bone. They were taller and broader than the Silvermane guards, their faces weathered and hardened by a lifetime of battling the elements, their eyes the color of glacier ice or winter sky. They stood with a stillness that was more threatening than any shouted challenge. These were men who knew the value of silence, who could wait for days in the snow for prey, and now they were waiting for her. In the center of this formidable line stood Alpha Caden. He was a giant, even larger than the stories had suggested, his shoulders so broad they seemed to block the path entirely. A thick, iron-gray beard, intricately braided with leather and small bones, covered the lower half of his face. A terrible scar, pale and ropey, ran from his hairline down across his left eye, which was a milky, sightless orb. His right eye, however, was a piercing pale blue, and it was fixed on Elara with an intensity that felt like a physical impact. Stripping away layers of composure and probing for the core of who she was, he held a massive spear, its tip a sharpened shard of obsidian, and he leaned on it, not for support, but as a king leans on his scepter. He did not glance at Theron. His entire being was focused on the woman who had dared to ride afront of the column. The Silvermane guards, with Boren at their head, fanned out behind Elara and Theron in a protective crescent. The silence that fell was heavier and more profound than the howling wind had been. It was a silence filled with the memory of old grievances, of generations of isolation and pride. The air crackled with the potential for violence. It was Elara who shattered the stillness. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. In the absolute quiet, her words carried with a crystalline clarity that seemed to resonate in the very rock around them. Alpha Caden, I am Elara. A simple statement devoid of title or flourish. We have journeyed far to stand before you. Caden's good eye narrowed. He still refused to acknowledge Theron. I know what you are, he rumbled, his voice like two slabs of granite grinding together. The tales fly on the wind, even to our high crags. The nameless servant who ensnared the Silvermane king with forbidden arts. He took a single, ground-shaking step forward, his shadow falling over her. You bring your tamed monarch into the heart of my strength? For what purpose? To demand what is ours? To display your sorcery? He spat the last word as if it were a curse. Beside her, Theron became utterly still, a predator coiling to spring. A low, dangerous growl vibrated in the air, a sound that made several of the Frostfang warriors shift their grips on their weapons. Elara did not look back. She simply lifted her hand, a slight, open-palm gesture of restraint. To her immense relief, and to the clear shock of the Frostfangs, the growl ceased. Theron deferred to her. The message was unmistakable. She returned her gaze to Caden, her expression unreadable. "I bring no demands for your land or your loyalty," she stated, her voice still calm, a steady stream against the rock of his hostility. "And the power I wield is no sorcery. It is a birthright, a gift from the first wolves who howled in these very mountains, a legacy written in blood and bone long before kings built their strongholds in the valleys." She paused, letting the history in her words settle over the assembly. "I come bearing two things. Alpha Caden, a warning of a danger you have not yet seen, and the clarity of truth, which is often the sharpest weapon of all." Caden let out a harsh, dismissive bark of laughter. "Warnings? Truth?" He swept his arm to encompass his warriors. His settlement, the towering peaks around them. "We are the Frostfang clan. We do not need coddling from the soft-bellied wolves of the lowlands. Our truth is as simple and unyielding as the stone beneath our feet. The strong endure. The weak are consumed by the snow. It is the way of the mountain." "A noble philosophy," Elara conceded, her head tilting slightly. "When the enemy is a blizzard or a rival clan or a starving bear, it is a clean fight, strength against strength. There is honor in that death." Her voice softened, but in doing so, it seemed to gain a sharper edge. "But what happens when the threat is not a claw to your throat, but a poison in your cup? Not a sword to your heart, but a lie in your ear whispered in the dark until it turns a brother's love to suspicion and an ally's loyalty to ash? A clean death in battle is a song for the bards. A slow, silent death of the spirit, a betrayal that unravels a clan from the inside. That is a tragedy that echoes for generations." Something shifted in Caden's face, a flicker of unease deep in his good eye, quickly extinguished by a surge of anger. "You speak in circles, girl, like all valley dwellers. We have no poison here. Our bombs are of ice and blood. We are strong. We are united." "Are you?" Elara asked. And her voice was now barely a whisper, yet it seemed to carry to every wolf present. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them until she was standing within the reach of his massive spear. The Frostfang line tensed as one, but she paid them no mind. She was no longer looking at Caden's face, but through him, at the shimmering, troubled web of fate that surrounded him. The Frostfang line tensed as one, but she paid them no mind. She was no longer looking at Caden's face, but through him, at the shimmering, troubled web of fate that surrounded him. She allowed her oracle sight to flare. Just enough. The world bled of color, replaced by the brilliant, intricate tapestry of light. The threads of the Frostfang warriors were strong, but they were strained, pulled taut by doubt and isolation. And there, coiled around Alpha Caden like a venomous serpent, was a thread of deepest black, a pulsing cord of malice and deceit. Her eyes traced it back to its source. A gaunt, older wolf standing just behind Caden's right shoulder. He had the look of a scholar or a shaman, with deep-set, calculating eyes and long, bony fingers that clutched a staff topped with a smoky quartz crystal. This was Jorik, the advisor, the source of the blight. "I see the connections that bind your people, Alpha Caden," Elara said, her voice taking on a resonant, otherworldly quality. It hummed in the air, making the hairs on every wolf's neck stand on end. She gestured to the stoic warriors. "I see the courage of your hunters, bright and fierce as the winter sun." Her hand then moved, her finger unerringly pointing not at Jorik, but at the dark thread connecting him to the Alpha. "And I see the viper you shelter at your side. I see the lies he feeds you, drop by drop, like hemlock in mead. He stokes the fires of your pride, while he severs the cords that tie you to the wider pack. He tells you that the Silvermane King is weak, that I am an abomination to be purged, that your strength is best kept alone and untarnished." She finally turned her terrifying, luminous gaze directly upon Jorik, who took an involuntary step back. His face draining of all color. "But his goal is not your independence, Alpha Caden. It is your destruction. He offers you isolation as a crown, but it is a cage, and he holds the key." Jorik found his voice. A reedy, desperate shriek. "She lies! The witch lies to divide us. She sees nothing but her own ambition. Kill her before her words take root." But Caden was frozen. He was staring at Elara, his one good eye wide with the turmoil she could feel radiating from him. The absolute, unshakable conviction in her tone, the way she had pinpointed the very seat of his recent doubts and frustrations without a single question asked, was dismantling a lifetime of certainties. He looked from Elara's fierce, truthful face to the panicked, guilty countenance of Jorik. He remembered the late-night councils, the whispered insinuations that Theron's rule was growing decadent and weak. At the arrival of a half-breed queen was an omen of the pack's decline. He remembered how Jorik had always steered him away from reconciliation toward greater defiance. Elara pressed her advantage, her voice dropping back to a conversational level, but it was no less powerful. "Look at him, Alpha. Look at your trusted Jorik. Can you not feel the decay his words have brought? Can you not see how his counsel has built walls where there should be bridges? He does not make you stronger. He makes you alone. And the lone wolf, no matter how powerful, is easy prey for the true enemy that gathers in the shadows, an enemy that fears a united pack above all else." She turned her head fully, her golden-flecked eyes pinning Jorik like a butterfly to a board. "He has met in secret with an emissary from the eastern wastes, a rogue who carries the stench of forgotten dark magics. Their plan is to open a door for that darkness here, to use the Frostfang clan as their blade to shatter the Silvermane. And when your people are broken and bleeding, having fought a war for a lie, they will sweep in and claim these mountains for their own." Jorik's composure shattered. "Silence, you demon!" he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. He raised his staff, and a palpable wave of malevolent energy, cold and suffocating, swept toward Elara, but it never reached her. Theron was there in an instant, a blur of motion, his own alpha power erupting in a golden shield that met the dark energy with a sound like shattering glass. A force of the collision threw Jorik backward onto the stone, and in that moment, all doubt vanished from Caden's face. The evidence was before him. The dark magic his own advisor had wielded, the protective power of the king he had been taught to despise, and the unwavering truth in the eyes of the queen, who had seen the cancer in his clan and had the courage to name it. The great alpha of the Frostfang clan, a man who had bowed to no one in 50 winters, slowly turned his head from his fallen, treacherous advisor to the small, dark-haired queen who stood fearlessly before him, the wind tugging at her hair like a crown of living shadow. The battle in his single, piercing eye was over. A grim, cold fury settled in its place. His voice, when it came, was low, but it rolled across the stone shelf with the finality of an avalanche. "Seize him!" Alpha Caden commanded. His gaze locked on Elara in a look of newfound hard-won respect. "Seize the traitor, Jorik! The Oracle Queen has spoken." The silence that followed Caden's command was more deafening than the previous tension. It was a void, sucking the sound from the world, leaving only the thin whistling wind and the ragged breaths of the stunned onlookers. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The Frostfang warriors, their minds reeling from the seismic shift in their reality, stood frozen, their loyalty to their alpha warring with the years of trust they had placed in Jorik. It was the traitor himself who broke the spell, scrambling backward on the rough stone like a crab. His robes tangling around his legs, Jorik let out a guttural, desperate shriek that was stripped of all its former cunning. "Fools, blind fools! She has enchanted you all. Can you not see? She is the poison." His eyes, wide with terror and fury, darted from Caden's stony face to the advancing warriors. "He will destroy us all! The old ways are ending, and I offered you a new path to power." His words, once so persuasive, now rang hollow and pathetic against the stark, unforgiving truth Elara had laid bare. The dark energy he had summoned, the palpable malevolence that had crashed against Theron's shield, was all the evidence the warriors needed. Two of the largest Frostfangs, their expressions grim, moved forward. They did not rough-handle him, but their grip on his arms was like iron, utterly unyielding. "Take him to the ice cells," Caden ordered. His voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Bind him in silver-laced chains. Let no one speak to him. He will answer for his treachery when the time is right." As Jorik was dragged away, his screams fading into the depths of the mountain settlement, Caden finally, slowly turned his gaze upon King Theron. The two alphas regarded each other across the rocky shelf, a chasm of years of suspicion and pride separating them. Theron had not moved from his protective stance near Elara, his power still a visible golden aura around him, a silent testament to the strength Jorik had claimed was weak. "King Theron," Caden said, the title sounding strange and formal on his tongue. He did not bow, but he gave a curt, respectful nod of his head, a monumental gesture. "It seems I have been a fool. My ears were closed to the words of a king, but they were open to the whispers of a snake." Theron's own power receded, though his posture remained vigilant, A clever snake can make even the wisest wolf doubt his own pack, Caden. The fault lies not with you for hearing the whisper, but with the viper for speaking it. He gestured to Elara. We were fortunate. We have a weapon against such deceit. All eyes returned to Elara. The adrenaline that had sustained her was ebbing, leading a profound weariness in its wake. Using her sight so aggressively, confronting the raw darkness in Jorik, had taken a toll. She felt light-headed, and a faint, throbbing ache had begun to pulse behind her eyes. She swayed slightly on her feet. Instantly, Theron was at her side, his hand a steadying presence on her elbow. Elara? I am all right, she murmured, though her pallor suggested otherwise. It is just the sight. It requires a price. Alpha Caden observed the exchange, his single eye missing nothing. He saw not a weak woman, but a powerful one who had pushed herself to her limits for the sake of his clan. He saw the king's unwavering support, not as dominance, but as partnership. The stories of a bewitched king crumbled before the reality of a bonded pair. A union of strength and sight. Your queen, she is welcome in our halls, Caden said, the words sounding less like a permission and more like a concession to a new, undeniable truth. You all are. You have exposed a cancer in my clan. For that, you have the thanks of the Frostfang and the debt of its alpha. He turned, his massive frame leading the way. Come, the wind has teeth here. We will speak inside, by the fire. The interior of the Frostfang stronghold was a revelation. It was not a building, but the mountain itself, carved out over centuries. Great arches of natural stone supported ceilings lost in shadow. The walls were lined with tapestries woven from thick wool, depicting scenes of hunts and star constellations, and the air was thick with the smell of smoke, curing meat, and the faint, clean scent of ice. Instead of torches, glowing crystals were set into recesses in the walls, casting a soft, blue-white light that made the entire place feel like the heart of a frozen star. They were led to a vast chamber, clearly the clan's great hall. A fire pit large enough to roast a full-grown elk blazed in the center, the smoke curling up towards a natural chimney in the rock ceiling. Fur-lined benches and chairs were arranged around it. Caden took his seat in a great chair of antler and stone, gesturing for Theron and Elara to sit in similar, though slightly less imposing, chairs opposite him. Caden took his seat in a great chair of antler and stone, gesturing for Theron and Elara to sit in similar, though slightly less imposing chairs opposite him, as a horn of warmed, spiced mead was pressed into her hands. Elara felt the profound strangeness of the moment. Just days ago, she had been a servant. Now, she was sitting as an honored guest in the hall of the most isolationist alpha in the wastes, because she had seen the truth in his soul. The eastern wastes, Caden began, his voice a low growl that echoed in the chamber. Jorik spoke of them. What do you know of this threat, Oracle? Elara took a sip of the strong mead, letting the warmth spread through her. I have seen it in visions. A gathering darkness. They are not a unified pack, but a cult of sorts, worshipping an ancient, hungry power. They believe that by devouring the strength of the old packs, they can awaken it. They seek to shatter the northern wastes, to break the alliances that have kept us strong, because a fractured enemy is easy to consume. She looked at Caden, her gaze earnest. They targeted you first, Alpha Caden, not because you are weak, but because you are strong. Your defiance of the stronghold made you the perfect tool. If the Frostfangs and the Silvermanes went to war, it would weaken both sides catastrophically, leaving the door open for the East to walk right in. Caden absorbed this, his fist clenching around his own drinking horn. And this power they worship? What is it? I do not know its name, Elara admitted. Only its nature. It is a void. It does not create, it consumes. It does not build, it corrupts. Jorik was not just a traitor, he was an infected wound, and his whispers were the fever. Theron leaned forward, the firelight dancing in his serious eyes. This changes everything. Caden, this is not a border skirmish. It is a war for the soul of our entire world. We cannot face it divided. The Frostfang Alpha was silent for a long time, staring into the roaring flames. The pride of generations warred with the stark reality of survival. Finally, he let out a long, slow breath that seemed to carry the weight of the mountains themselves. The old ways, the ways of isolation, nearly doomed us, he conceded, his voice thick with a reluctant pride. Hard-won wisdom. A wolf alone on the ice may be proud, but it is also hungry and vulnerable to the pack of rivals. He looked from Theron to Elara, his single eye blazing with a new fire. The Frostfang clan will not be that lone wolf. Our strength will not be used as a weapon against our own. Your warning has been heard, Oracle Queen. Your truth has been seen. He stood up, drawing himself to his full, imposing height. He looked not at Theron, but at Elara, and placed his fist over his heart in the traditional Frostfang gesture of oath-making. The Frostfang clan pledges its strength to the Silvermane crown, he declared, his voice echoing through the great hall, reaching every wolf, listening in the shadows, not as a subject to a master, but as an ally to an ally. We will stand together against the coming darkness. This I swear on the blood of my ancestors and the ice of my home. It was more than they had dared hope for. It was not submission. It was a partnership forged in the fires of betrayal and sealed with the clarity of truth. As the words settled, Elara felt a shift in the golden tapestry of her vision. The murky, blighted threads around the Frostfangs didn't just clear. They blazed with a new, brilliant, determined light, weaving themselves firmly back into the main web of the northern wastes. The first fracture had been healed. But as she looked into the fire, past the moment of triumph, she saw the vision again, the vast, encroaching darkness from the east. It had been thwarted here today, but it was not gone. It was patient, and it was hungry, and it was still coming. The great hall of the Frostfang clan remained a bastion of simmering tension, even after Caden's earth-shattering pledge. The air, thick with wood smoke and the pungent aroma of spiced mead, was charged with a new, volatile energy. It was the sound of a worldview fracturing and realigning. Warriors who had spent a lifetime viewing the Silvermane pack with suspicion now cast furtive, uncertain glances at their king and his queen. The revelation of Jorik's betrayal was a wound, fresh and deep. The clan moved with the stiff, careful gait of an animal trying not to aggravate a grievous injury. Elara sat by the fire, the warmth seeping into her bones. a welcome counter to the psychic chill left by her confrontation. The throbbing in her temples had subsided to a dull ache, a persistent reminder of the cost of her gift. Theron sat beside her, a silent, watchful presence. He did not engage in the tentative, low-voiced conversations springing up around the hall. His focus was divided between observing the mood of the Frostfangs and monitoring Elara's pallor. The mate bond hummed between them, a conduit for his quiet concern and her weary gratitude. Alpha Caden descended from his antler throne, his massive frame moving with a newfound grim purpose. He dismissed the majority of his warriors with a sharp gesture, leaving only his most trusted captains in the hall. The atmosphere shifted from public spectacle to private council. "The ice cells are deep and warded with ancient runes," Caden stated, his voice a low rumble as he lowered himself onto a bench opposite them. "Jorik will not be weaving his magic from there. But a trapped snake is still a snake. He will spit his venom to anyone who comes near. We need to know what he knows," Theron said, his gaze sharp. "The extent of the Eastern cult's infiltration, their numbers." "Their timeline," Caden nodded, his single eye glinting. "He will be questioned, but he is cunning. He has spent years learning the minds of my people. Standard interrogation may yield nothing but more lies." All eyes turned to Elara. The expectation in the room was a physical weight. She was the oracle. Truth was her domain. The thought of delving back into the polluted stream of Jorik's consciousness made her feel nauseous. I can try," she said, her voice hesitant. His mind is a fortress of deceit. To force my way in, it would be a violation, and it could damage him or me." She looked at Theron, then at Caden. "There may be another way. The threads I see, they are connections. Jorik's thread to his Eastern contact was severed when he was captured, but the echo of it might remain. If I can follow that echo, trace it back to its source, I might learn more than he would ever willingly tell us." Theron's brow furrowed with immediate concern. "Elara, you are already exhausted. To send your consciousness out across such a distance into unknown territory, it's too dangerous." "Is it more dangerous than walking blind into a war?" she countered softly. "We have an alliance, Caden. That is our shield. But knowledge is our sword. I must try to forge it." Caden watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. He saw not a king commanding a subject, but a partner arguing with his equal. It was a dynamic he did not fully understand, but one he was beginning to respect. "The Oracle Queen has a warrior spirit," he grunted, a note of approval in his voice. "My shaman, Anya, has a chamber used for deep meditation. It is lined with crystals that amplify inner sight. It is at your disposal if you wish to make the attempt." The offer was both generous and a test. Elara knew that to refuse would be seen as weakness. To accept would be to step once more into the unknown. She met Caden's gaze. "I would be grateful for the use of it." The meditation chamber was a small, circular room deep within the mountain's heart. It was even colder here, the air still and heavy. The walls were embedded with countless geode crystals that sparkled in the light of a single fat candle placed in the center of the floor. The effect was like being inside a frozen galaxy. A shaman, Anya, was a wizened old she-wolf with eyes that saw too much. She said nothing, merely gestured for Elara to sit on the single fur rug in the room's center before bowing and closing the stone door behind her, leaving Elara in profound silence. Alone, Elara took a series of deep, calming breaths. The scent of cold stone and ozone filled her lungs. She closed her eyes, willing her heartbeat to slow, pushing the residual fear and fatigue to the edges of her mind. She reached for her power, not with the forceful thrust she had used in the past, but with a gentle, seeking touch. The golden tapestry of fate unfolded before her inner eye. Here, in the heart of the Frost-Fang territory, the threads were strong and clear, now shining with the renewed purpose of Caden's pledge. She focused, searching for the frayed, blackened end that had been Jorik's connection. It was like finding a single, poisoned needle in a field of golden wheat. There it was, a sticky, pulsing stump of darkness, still leaking malice. Gathering her courage, Elara sent a tendril of her awareness along the ghost of that severed thread. It was like swimming upstream through a river of ice and shadows. Vague, terrifying impressions assailed her. A landscape of jagged, black rocks under a blood-red sky. The scent of ash and ozone. The sound of discordant, chanting voices that grated against her soul. The thread led east, further than she had ever imagined, across vast distances. She pushed further, the strain making her physical body tremble. She needed a face, a name, a location. The echo grew fainter, more distorted. And then she felt it. A presence. Vast, ancient, and utterly malevolent. It was not the Eastern contact. It was what the contact served. It was the void itself. It was aware of her. It was what the contact served. It was the void itself. It was aware of her. A tidal wave of pure psychic negation slammed into her consciousness. It was a force that sought not to fight, but to unmake. To erase. It had no thoughts, only a single endless hunger. Elara's mental scream was silent. She felt her own light, her very sense of self, beginning to fray at the edges, dissolving into that infinite nothingness. Elara. The voice was a clap of thunder in the void, a golden anchor thrown into the abyss. It was Theron, not just his voice, but his essence, his strength flooding through the mate bond, his presence wrapped around her. A shield of pure, defiant life against the consuming darkness. He was there, in the meditation chamber, his hands on her shoulders, his alpha power, a blazing sun in the crystal room, pulling her back. She wrenched her consciousness free with a gasp that tore at her throat, collapsing forward onto the cold stone floor. She was shaking uncontrollably, drenched in a cold sweat. Theron was on his knees beside her. His face etched with a fear she had never seen in him before. "I felt you, fading," he said, his voice raw. "Your light was going out." Outside, the single candle in the chamber snuffed out, as if the very air had been stolen from it. It took long minutes for the tremors to subside and for her breath to steady. Supported by Theron, she relayed what she had seen and felt, the bleak landscape, the chanting, and most of all, the horrifying. sentient hunger that had become aware of her search. "It knows we're looking," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It knows we are a threat." Back in the great hall, under the concerned gazes of Caden and his captains. The mood was grim. Elara's failed scrying mission was not a failure of information, but a confirmation of their worst fears. "This is no mere rival pack," Boren stated, his usual gruffness replaced by a somber tone. "This is an existential war." "Then we must prepare for one," Caden declared, his fist slamming on the arm of his chair. "The Frostfang forges will work day and night. Our smiths will craft weapons not just of steel, but of silver and star iron. The old metals that bite deepest into dark magic. Our hunters will range further, watching the eastern passes for any sign of movement." The alliance was no longer a political agreement. It was a military pact, forged in the face of a terrifying new understanding. Plans were drawn for regular patrols between the stronghold and the Serpent's Tooth, for shared scouts, for a system of signal fires along the mountain peaks. Later, as they were given chambers to rest, a series of interconnected caves furnished with surprisingly comfortable furs. Elara stood at the entrance, looking out at the moonlit, snow-covered peaks. The beauty was now underscored by a pervasive sense of dread. Theron came to stand beside her. "You should not have done that," he said, his voice low. "You almost didn't come back." "I had to," she replied, watching her breath mist in the frigid air. "And you were there." "You pulled me back." She looked up at him, the moonlight silvering his features. "The bond, it's more than just a feeling, isn't it? It's a tether, a lifeline." "It is whatever we make it," he said, his gaze intense. Tonight it was a shield, a weapon, a bridge across the dark. He didn't touch her, but the space between them felt charged, alive with the shared experience of having faced the abyss together. "We are stronger together than we are apart." "Elara, in every way." The truth of his words settled deep within her. The scared servant girl would have been obliterated by the void. The queen, anchored by her king, had survived. The path ahead was darker and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. But for the first time, she truly, completely believed she would not have to walk it alone. The enemy had revealed a fraction of its terrible nature, and in doing so, had only succeeded in forging the first true, unbreakable link in the alliance that would stand against it. The departure from the Frostfang stronghold 2 days later was a markedly different affair from their arrival. The shrieking wind in the stone sentinel's pass seemed less a challenge and more a solemn salute. Alpha Caden himself saw them to the mouth of the pass, his massive frame a stark silhouette against the granite sky. The formalities were brief, but the meaning was profound. A pact had been sealed, not with ink and parchment, but with exposed treachery and the shared glimpse of a terrifying enemy. "Your truth has given my clan a future, Oracle Queen," Caden said, his single eye holding Elara's gaze. "When the darkness comes, the Frostfangs will stand with you. You have my word." He then turned to Theron, and the two alphas exchanged a look that transcended words, a recognition of shared burden and newfound respect. "Travel safely. King Theron, the mountains have ears, and the wind carries more than just snow." The journey back began in a heavy, contemplative silence. the success of their mission was overshadowed by the chilling knowledge Elara had brought back from the edge of the void. The air itself felt different, charged with a new significance. Every shadow between the trees seemed deeper, every distant sound a potential threat. They were no longer just a royal party on a diplomatic mission. They were scouts returning from the front lines of a war no one else knew was coming. Elara rode in silence, her mind replaying the sensation of that infinite hunger, the way it had sought to unmake her very essence. It was a feeling that clung to her soul like a frost, a cold dread that the warmth of the sun on her face could not entirely dispel. Theron, ever perceptive, stayed close to her side, his presence a steady, grounding force. He didn't press her with questions, allowing her the space to process the terror she had endured. The mate bond between them hummed with a new layer of understanding, a shared trauma that had deepened their connection in a way peaceful days never could. As they descended from the thinner, colder air of the foothills back into the dense pine forests, the world began to feel familiar again. But Elara found she was seeing it with new eyes. Before, the forest had been a place of beauty and solitude. Now, she saw it through the lens of a protector. She found herself studying the lay of the land, noting potential ambush points, assessing the strength of the ancient trees as if gauging their ability to withstand a siege. The weight of the crown was no longer an abstract concept. It was the very real burden of foresight, of knowing a storm was coming and being responsible for sheltering every soul in its path. It was on the third day of their return journey, as they made camp by a swift-flowing river, that a new facet of her power began to stir. Exhausted from the day's ride, she had closed her eyes, seeking not a vision but simple rest. Instead, a cascade of images, sharp and fleeting, flashed behind her eyelids. She saw a Silvermane patrol, not theirs, but one from the stronghold, moving through a narrow gully choked with brambles. She saw a glint of sunlight on something that was not rock or leaf. She saw a net, cleverly concealed, and the sudden, panicked snarls of wolves as it sprung. Then the image shifted. She saw the same wolves, bound and captive, being forced through a dank underground tunnel, and she felt it, a familiar oily residue of the same dark influence that had clung to Jorik. Her eyes snapped open. Theron. He was at her side in an instant, alerted by the urgency in her voice. "What is it?" "A patrol," she said, her breath coming fast. "Gareth's patrol, I think. They've been taken." "An ambush in the Bramble Gully. A day's ride from the stronghold. They're being taken underground." She described the brief, terrifying vision in precise detail. Theron's face hardened. Gareth was a capable, veteran warrior. For his entire patrol to be captured spoke of sophisticated planning and significant force. He didn't question her. He didn't ask for proof. He simply turned and barked orders to Boren. "Break camp. Now, we ride for Bramble Gully, armed for a rescue. The Queen has had a vision." The trust he placed in her, the immediate and unquestioning acceptance of her sight, sent a surge of fierce determination through her. This was her role. This was her power in action. It wasn't just for grand councils and confronting traitorous advisors. It was for saving the lives of their people, here and now. They rode through the night, pushing their horses hard. Elara's vision acted as their map, her descriptions guiding them unerringly toward the gully. As they neared the location just before dawn, they dismounted and proceeded on foot. Their movements silent and fluid. The air in the gully was still, heavy with the scent of crushed pine and a faint, coppery tang of blood. There, just as she had seen, was the scene of the ambush, a large, reinforced net was tangled in the brambles and the ground was churned up with the signs of a struggle. Boren knelt, examining the tracks with a hunter's expertise. "About a dozen of them," he murmured to Theron, "heavily armed." They dragged the prisoners this way. He pointed toward a sheer rock face that seemed impassable, but Elara was already moving toward it. In her vision, she had seen the entrance. Now, with her physical eyes, she could see the clever camouflage, a curtain of living ivy and loose scree that concealed a narrow fissure in the rock. "Here," she whispered. Theron gave a series of hand signals. The Silvermane guards melted into the forest. Surrounding the hidden entrance, Theron, Boren, and Elara prepared to enter. Theron looked at Elara, a question in his eyes. She answered with a firm nod. She would not wait outside. The tunnel was dark, damp and narrow, forcing them to move in single file. The only light came from a faint, phosphorescent fungus growing on the walls, giving the passage an eerie, greenish glow. The air grew colder as they descended, and the sound of dripping water was a constant, maddening rhythm. Elara could feel the oppressive residue of dark magic here, a faint echo of what she had encountered in Jorik's thread. It was a trail she could follow as surely as a bloodhound. After what felt like an eternity, they heard voices ahead, muffled, harsh, and laced with the same discord and arrogance she had sensed in her vision. They emerged into a larger cavern, lit by a single fire. There, bound and gagged, were Gareth and 5 of his warriors. Standing over them were a group of rough-looking rogues, their attire a mismatched collection of pelts and stolen armor. But one figure stood apart. Taller and leaner, dressed in dark robes, he held a staff topped with a twisted black crystal that seemed to drink the light from the fire. "The Silvermane sends his puppies to sniff at our heels," the robed figure was sneering. "He has no idea what is coming. Soon his entire kingdom will be—" He stopped abruptly, his head snapping up as if he had heard a sound. His eyes, a flat, soulless black, locked onto the tunnel entrance just as Theron stepped into the firelight. He stopped abruptly, his head snapping up as if he had heard a sound. His eyes, a flat, soulless black, locked onto the tunnel entrance just as Theron stepped into the firelight. The fight was short, brutal, and decisive. Taken by surprise, the rogue guards were no match for the fury of the king and his elite warriors. Theron moved like a force of nature, a whirlwind of focused violence, while Boren and the others efficiently neutralized the others. The robed mage, however, was not a warrior. He raised his staff, and the black crystal pulsed with a sickly light. A wave of debilitating fear washed over the cavern, causing several of the guards to falter. Their weapons dipping, but the wave broke against Theron's unwavering will and the golden shield of his alpha power. It also broke against Elara. She stood her ground, the memory of the true void making this mage's parlor tricks feel pathetic. She focused her will, not on attacking him, but on severing the connection between the mage and his crystal. In her sight, it was a thick, vile thread of dependency. With a mental snap that made her flinch, she severed it. The mage cried out as the light in his crystal died, the backlash throwing him to the ground. Before he could rise, Boren was on him, disarming him and binding his hands with silver cord. The rescue was over. Gareth and his men were freed, their gratitude palpable and humbling. As they made their way back to the surface, the rising sun feeling like a blessing, Gareth looked at Elara with a new heart. Profound respect. "We would have been lost, my queen. How did you know?" She simply smiled, a tired but genuine expression. "The land speaks to those who listen, Captain." On the final leg of their journey home, the mood was lighter, buoyed by their success. But as the familiar walls of the Silvermane stronghold came into view, Elara felt the weight settle back upon her shoulders. They were returning with a victory. Yes, an alliance secured, a patrol rescued, an enemy mage captured. But they were also returning with a warning of a war that would test the very soul of their world. She looked at the stronghold, at the home she was still learning to call her own, and saw not just stone and timber, but the lives of every wolf within. She had saved a handful today. Soon she would need to save them all. The crown was heavy, but as she felt Theron's hand briefly cover hers on her reins, she knew it was a weight she would not carry alone. The queen had returned, and she was ready to rule. The return to the Silvermane stronghold was a triumphal yet somber procession. News of their success had flown ahead of them on the swift wings of rumor. And the main gates were thrown open to a crowd of cheering pack members. They saw their king, stern and victorious, and their queen, who rode beside him with a quiet dignity that seemed to radiate its own light. They saw the rescued patrol, weary but unharmed, and the bound, dark-robed mage who was a tangible symbol of the threat they now all faced. But for Elara, the cheers were a distant hum, the visceral memory of the ambush. The claustrophobic darkness of the tunnel and the chilling void she had touched in the mountains were layered over the familiar sight of home. The stronghold was no longer just a place of safety. It was the heart of a territory that was now under a silent, gathering siege. The first order of business was the prisoner. He was thrown into the deepest dungeon, a cell far darker and more secure than the one that had held her. This time, there were no public accusations, no grand trials. Theron, Caden's warning fresh in his mind, understood the enemy they faced operated in shadows. The interrogation would be conducted away from prying eyes and susceptible ears. Elara stood with Theron in the dimly lit chamber outside the dungeon cell. She could feel the mage's malevolent presence even through the thick stone walls, a low, discordant thrum that set her teeth on edge. "I must be the one to question him," she said, her voice firm despite the unease coiling in her stomach. Theron's immediate reaction was a protective refusal, a denial that flashed in his eyes. "No!" "Absolutely not. You saw what his magic did. To be in a confined space with him, it's too great a risk." "The risk is greater if we learn nothing," Elara countered. "He is shielded against normal interrogation. His mind is a fortress, just like Jorik's. But I am not a normal interrogator. I can see the lies. I can find the cracks in his defenses. I can follow the threads of his loyalty back to their source." She placed a hand on his arm, her touch a gentle plea. "You pulled me back from the abyss once, Theron. You can do it again if you must, but I have to try. Our people's lives depend on the knowledge he holds." The conflict warred on Theron's face. The king, who needed the information, warring with the man who feared for his mate. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he relented. I will be right here. The moment I sense your distress, I am ending this. The cell was a cube of cold, damp stone. The mage, whose name they learned was Malik, was chained to the wall with silver manacles that sizzled faintly against his skin. He looked up as Elara entered, his black eyes gleaming with a hatred that was both personal and ancient. The Oracle, he hissed, his voice like dry leaves scraping together. The little seer who thinks she can stare into the sun without being blinded. Elara did not respond. She simply stood before him, allowing her oracle sight to unfurl. The cell was instantly awash with the sickly purple-black aura of his corruption. Threads of dark energy writhed around him, connecting into the distant east. But they were muted, strained by the silver and the dungeon's wards. I have no interest in your insults, Malik, she said, her voice echoing calmly in the small space. I am only interested in the truth. And I will have it. She reached out with her mind not as a battering ram, but as a subtle, probing needle. She sought the memories of his orders, his contacts, the location of his masters. But his mental defenses were like a wall of thorns and shifting mirrors. Every time she thought she found a purchase, it twisted away, reflecting back her own fears and doubts. She saw fleeting images, a fortress of black obsidian, legions of wolves with eyes as dead as his. A ritual under a blood-red moon. But they were fragments, disconnected and unreliable. The strain began to wear on her. A cold sweat broke out on her brow. Malak sensed her struggle, and a cruel smile twisted his lips. You see, he taunted, your truth is a weak, flickering candle. The power I serve is an eternal night. It does not show you what is, it is. Join us, little queen. Your sight would be a valuable tool in the unmaking. You could have a place of honor in the new world. His words were a venom designed to corrupt and despair. For a terrifying second, the image he painted, an end to the struggle, the surrender to the inevitable, felt seductively peaceful. The weight of her crown, the constant fear, the responsibility, it would all be over. But then she felt it, the steady golden pulse of Theron's presence through the door, her anchor, her reason to fight. The moment of weakness passed. You offer me nothing but oblivion, Elara said, her voice gaining strength. She changed her tactic. Instead of trying to breach his defenses, she focused on the threads of his power. She saw how they were woven, saw the knots of his allegiance, the points of strain. She saw one thread, thinner than the others, that seemed to pulse with a different energy, not the void's hunger, but a more familiar, base emotion, greed. You're not always a believer, were you, Malik? She murmured, her eyes seeing through him to the man he had been. You sought power, and the cult offered it, but you are not at the heart of their circle. You are a tool, a disposable one. They sent you here to die, to test our strength. They have already abandoned you. A flicker of uncertainty quickly masked crossed his face. It was the crack she needed. I see it, she pressed, her voice relentless. I see the wolf you were, the one who craved respect. They promised you a kingdom, but they have given you chains and a cold cell. They have taken everything from you. Your freedom, your future, your name. She was no longer searching for military secrets. She was attacking the foundation of his loyalty. She poured her will into that single fraying thread of his avarice, amplifying his doubts, reflecting back his own insignificance in the grand design of his masters. Malik's sneer faltered. The unwavering faith in his eyes began to crumble, replaced by a dawning, horrified realization. Elara's words were not accusations. They were echoes of his own deeply buried fears. She was holding up a mirror to his soul, and he was recoiling from the emptiness he saw there. You know nothing," he shouted. But the conviction was gone from his voice. "I know that the void consumes all, Malik, even its most loyal servants. You are already dead. You just haven't stopped breathing yet." With a final psychic push, she shattered the last of his resolve. He didn't give her troop movements or secret plans. Instead, he broke down, sobbing, a broken vessel of a man. He confessed not to strategy, but to motive. He spoke of the cult's prophet, a figure known only as the Harbinger, who promised a cleansing fire that would burn away the old world, leaving only the strong to inherit the ashes. He confirmed that the Frostfangs were their first target, and that the attack was not imminent, but methodical, a slow poisoning of alliances, a systematic weakening of their defenses from within. It was not the tactical victory Theron had hoped for, but it was a crucial one. They now understood the enemy's philosophy, its goal of total annihilation, not conquest. They understood its patience, its insidious methods. When Elara emerged from the cell, she was pale and trembling. But her eyes held a hard-won clarity. Theron was there instantly, his hands on her shoulders, his gaze searching hers. "He is broken," she said quietly. "He told me what we are truly facing. It is not a war for land or power. It is a crusade of extinction." Theron listened as she relayed the mage's broken confession. His expression grew grimmer with each word. The nature of the conflict had just shifted. They were no longer preparing for a battle, but for a fight for their very existence. Later, as they stood on the battlements looking out over the territory they were sworn to protect, Theron spoke into the quiet night. "You were right to go in there. What you learned, it changes everything." Elara leaned against the cold stone, the wind tugging at her hair. "The crown is heavier than I ever imagined, Theron. It is not just about ruling. It is about being willing to stare into the darkest parts of the world, and the darkest parts of yourself, and not look away." He moved to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers. A solid, comforting presence. "Then it's a good thing you do not wear it alone." He moved to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers. A solid, comforting presence. "Then it is a good thing you do not wear it alone." Below them, the stronghold slept, unaware of the revelations in the dungeon, of the scale of the threat gathering in the east. But their king and queen stood watch, their bond forged in fire and shadow, a united front against the coming eternal night. The first true battle of the war had been fought not with swords, but with truth, and the Oracle Queen had emerged victorious. The days that followed the interrogation of Malak were a whirlwind of purposeful activity. The easy contentment that had sometimes graced the stronghold was gone, replaced by a grim, determined energy. The revelation of the cult's genocidal intent had transformed the theoretical threat into a chilling certainty. There would be no negotiation, no truce. It was victory or oblivion. Theron's leadership became a thing of sharp, decisive action. Councils were no longer debating societies, they were war rooms. The new council, with its mix of noble-born and common-blooded members, proved its worth. A master blacksmith from the forges, now sitting at the high table, spoke with authority about the need for star iron reinforcements on their gates. A huntress from the deep woods advised on camouflaging their outposts. Elara listened to it all, her quiet presence a steadying force, her occasional questions piercing to the heart of a matter. She was learning the language of logistics and defense, her mind a sponge, absorbing the intricate details of ruling in a time of crisis. Her own project, the Queen's guardianship, began to take tangible form. It was not a military unit, but something perhaps more vital. The Pack's conscience and its early warning system. She interviewed candidates herself. Not looking for the strongest warriors, but for those with keen judgment, unwavering integrity, and a deep love for their community. She chose a quiet, observant scout who knew every hidden path, a compassionate healer who understood the scars left by fear, and even a former bully who had come to her with a sincere, stammering apology, seeking redemption through service. They were her eyes and ears, tasked not with fighting the enemy at the gates, but with ensuring the enemy never found a foothold within their own hearts. One afternoon, she found herself in the training grounds, not as a spectator, but as a participant. Theron had insisted. A queen must know how to defend herself, he'd stated, his tone brooking no argument. I will not always be at your side. Her instructor was Boren. The grizzled warrior was a patient but demanding teacher. He started with the basics, balance, footwork, how to fall without breaking. Elara's body, accustomed to the repetitive strains of servitude, was clumsy with the deliberate, explosive movements of combat. She stumbled. She overbalanced. Her muscles ached with a new, fiery protest. But she did not quit. There was a fierce satisfaction in the struggle. In the tangible progress of learning to parry a practiced dagger or twist out of a hold, it was a different kind of power from her oracle sight, a physical, grounded strength that belonged entirely to her. Boren, after a particularly grueling session where she had managed to disarm him for a split second, gave a rare grunting approval. You've got grit, my queen. That's something you can't teach. Her relationship with Theron continued its slow, deliberate evolution. The mate bond was a constant warm hum in her chest, a connection that grew richer and more complex with each shared challenge. They spent their evenings together, often in silence. Him reviewing reports while she studied ancient texts on the oracle lineage that Rowena had helped her uncover. It was a comfortable, productive silence, the kind that exists between two people who no longer need words to communicate their presence and support. One evening, he looked up from a map and asked, "Does it ever frighten you, the weight of what we must do?" Elara set aside the fragile scroll she was reading. "It terrifies me," she admitted freely. "The thought of failing them, of seeing this all burn." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the stronghold, the territory, their people. But then I remember the alternative. to have done nothing, to have hidden. That is a different kind of fear, one that tastes like ashes and regret. This fear, the fear of the protector, it is clean. It gives me strength. Theron watched her, the firelight dancing in his eyes. When I first saw you in the council chamber, glowing like a creature from a legend, I saw a power I did not understand. Now, he paused, searching for the right words. Now I see the strength that wields it. The crown has not changed you, Elara. It has revealed you. His words settled deep within her, a balm on the raw edges of her anxiety. He saw her not as a symbol or a weapon, but as a person, a partner. The true test of their new unity came not from the east, but from within. A dispute erupted between two families. One from an old, respected bloodline, the other newer arrivals to the stronghold, over land rights on the western border. In the past, such a dispute would have been settled by Elder Kalin, likely in favor of the noble family. Breeding further resentment, Theron brought the matter before the new council. The debate was heated. The old guard argued for tradition and lineage. The new members argued for merit and fairness. For a moment, it seemed the old divisions would crack their fragile new alliance open. Then Elara spoke. She did not take a side. Instead, she asked the head of each family to step forward. She looked at them not as a queen passing judgment, but as the oracle who saw their threads. Your anger is a knot, she said, her voice quieting the room. I can see it, tangled and dark, connecting you. But I also see the brighter threads, the thread of your shared history. When his grandfather fought beside yours against the winter rogues, the thread of your children who play together in the courtyards, unaware of this feud. She turned her gaze to the nobleman. You fear losing what is yours because it defines you. She then looked at the newcomer. And you fight so fiercely because you have nothing else to claim as your own. She paused, letting them absorb her words. The land is not the issue. It is the fear. And fear is the weapon our true enemy uses. Do not wield it for them. Her words, spoken with the quiet authority of one who could see the soul of the conflict, dissolved the tension. Shamefaced, the two men looked at each other, truly seeing the pettiness of their quarrel in the face of the greater threat. They reached a compromise on the spot, a fair division that honored both their needs. It was a small victory, but its impact was immense. It proved that their new way could work, that strength did not have to mean domination, and that justice could be tempered with wisdom. That night, as a cool, clear night settled over the stronghold, Elara stood on her balcony. She could feel the pulse of the pack below her, a complex, living tapestry of hopes, fears, and wives intertwined, the chain that bound them together. Once rusted with prejudice and neglect, was being reforged, link by painstaking link. It was stronger now, tempered in the fires of truth and shared purpose. The enemy from the east was a storm on the horizon, a devouring void. But within the walls of the Silvermane stronghold, a different kind of power was rising. It was the power of unity, of a queen who ruled with sight and compassion, and a king who had learned to lead with his mate, not merely beside her. They were forging a chain of loyalty and trust that she prayed would be strong enough to withstand the coming hurricane. The crisp, orderly rhythm of life within the stronghold was shattered a fortnight later by the frantic arrival of a mud-spattered courier from the western settlement of Oakhaven. The man, barely more than a boy, stumbled into the great hall, his eyes wide with a terror that was more than just exhaustion. He carried with him not a written missive, but a story so bizarre and chilling it seemed torn from a fever dream. "It's the woods, your majesties," the boy stammered, collapsing to one knee before Theron and Elara. "The whiskering timberlands, they've gone mad." He spoke of a blight that had seeped into the ancient forest. Trees were weeping a thick black sap that smelled of rot and despair. Animals were found dead, not from predation, but as if the very will to live had been sucked from them. And worst of all were the people. Settlers on the forest's edge were falling into a deep, unwakeable slumber, their bodies wasting away while their minds, according to the local healer, were trapped in endless, terrifying nightmares. "The healer, Master Fenwick, he says it's no natural sickness," the boy quavered. "He says it feels intentional, like the forest itself is being poisoned against us." A cold dread, entirely different from the sharp fear of battle, coiled in Elara's stomach. This was not a direct assault. It was a subtle, insidious corruption, an attack on the very spirit of their land. It was the strategy Malik had hinted at, the slow, systematic weakening. Theron's council was divided. Boren and the military-minded advocated for sending a contingent of warriors to secure the area and hunt for whatever beast or mage was causing it. The more cautious members suggested quarantine, sealing off Oakhaven to prevent the mysterious sleeping sickness from spreading. Elara listened to the debates, but her mind was elsewhere. She was feeling the land, stretching her oracle senses toward the west. The effort was immense, like trying to hear a whisper from 1,000 leagues away. But through the static of distance, she felt it, a deep, sipply thrum of wrongness. It was the same dissonant energy as Malik's magic, but diluted, woven into the very earth and air of the timberlands. It wasn't a single point of evil. It was a miasma. "They are both wrong," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the argument. All eyes turned to her. Sending soldiers will accomplish nothing but exposing them to the corruption. Quarantining Oakhaven is to abandon our people to a fate worse than death. This is not a sickness of the body that can be contained. It is a sickness of the spirit, of the land itself. "Then what would you suggest, my queen?" asked one of the older council members, his voice laced with skepticism. "We cannot fight a feeling." "Then what would you suggest, my queen?" asked one of the older council members, his voice laced with skepticism. "We cannot fight a feeling." "No," Elara agreed, standing up, her decision solidifying as she spoke. "But we can heal it." "This is not a task for warriors. It is a task for me." The silence that followed was absolute. Theron's face was a mask of stone, but she could feel the torrent of protest through their bond. "Elara," he began, his voice dangerously low, "you cannot mean to go there. We have no idea what this is. It could be a trap specifically for you." "All the more reason I must be the one to spring it," she replied, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. "If this is the work of the Harbinger, then he is testing us. He is probing our weaknesses. He wants to see if we will cower behind our walls or if we will fight for every inch of our land. I will not cower." My sight is the only weapon we have against this kind of poison." The argument that ensued was their most heated yet, conducted first in the council chamber with clipped, formal words, and later in the privacy of their chambers with raw, unfiltered emotion. "It is suicide," Theron finally growled. Is control fraying? To walk blindly into a corrupted forest? To expose yourself to a magic that puts people into comas? I will not allow it. "You cannot forbid it, Theron," Elara shot back, her own frustration rising. "I'm not a prisoner in this castle. I am your queen. My power has a purpose, and that purpose is not to remain safe while our people suffer. What is the point of being an oracle if I cannot see the path to healing? The point is for you to live," he roared, the sound echoing off the stone walls, "so that you can use your sight to guide us in the battles to come. Throwing yourself into the dark now is a reckless waste." "It is not a waste. It is my duty," she cried, her voice breaking. "Do you think I want to go? I am terrified. The void I touched in the mountains, this feels like its echo. But I have to face it, because if I don't, if I let fear rule me, then the Harbinger has already won. He will have turned the Queen of the Silvermane into another prisoner locked in a gilded cage." Her words hung in the air, stark and true. Theron stared at her, his chest heaving, the conflict between the king and the man raging in his eyes. He saw the fear in her, but he also saw the unyielding resolve. She was not the scared girl from the council chamber anymore. She was a force of nature, and he could no more command the tide to retreat than he could command her to abandon her people. He closed his eyes, defeated. "Then I am coming with you." "No," she said softly, her anger spent. "You are the king. Your place is here, leading the pack, preparing our defenses. If this is a diversion, we cannot both walk into it. You must be the anchor that holds this territory fast." She stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest, over his heart. "Trust me, Theron, as I trust you. Be my strength from afar." A journey to Oakhaven was a somber one. Elara traveled with a small, hand-picked group, Warren for his unshakable practicality, Rowena for her healing wisdom, and two of her newly sworn guardians for their keen instincts. The further west they rode, the more the land changed. The vibrant greens of the healthy forest faded to a sickly yellowish hue. The air, once filled with birdsong, grew heavy and silent. A faint, cloying scent of decay hung in the atmosphere, making it difficult to breathe deeply. When they reached the outskirts of the whispering timberlands, the reality was worse than the courier's description. The trees were grotesque parodies of their former selves, their bark split and oozing that viscous black sap. The ground was littered with the bodies of small animals, their eyes wide with a frozen terror. The very silence was oppressive, a physical weight on the ears. The village of Oakhaven was a place of mourning. The healthy moved like ghosts, their faces etched with a helpless dread as they tended to their sleeping loved ones in a makeshift infirmary. Master Fenwick, a weary old man with kind eyes, greeted them with a look of profound relief. "Queen Elara," he breathed, "the forest, it weeps, and it makes us weep with it." Elara went immediately to the infirmary. The sight was heartbreaking. Dozens of people, from elders to young children, lay still as death, their breathing shallow, their faces contorted in silent screams. She approached a young woman and gently placed her hand on the patient's forehead. Closing her eyes, Elara plunged into her oracle sight. It was like diving into a swamp of nightmares. The woman's consciousness was not absent. It was trapped in a labyrinth of her own deepest fears. Amplified and twisted by the external corruption, Elara saw the threads of the sickness, thin, black tendrils that had wormed their way into the woman's mind, feeding on her terror and reinforcing it. This was the Harbinger's true weapon, despair. He wasn't just killing bodies, he was devouring hope. Pulling back, she turned to Rowena and Fenwick. It's a psychic poison. It attacks the mind, feeding on fear until the victim has no energy left to wake. Can you cure it? Boren asked, his usual gruffness softened by the grim surroundings. I don't know if cure is the word, Elara murmured, looking toward the weeping woods. I have to find the source. I have to convince the forest itself to fight back. Ignoring the protests of her companions, she walked alone to the edge of the corrupted tree line. The malevolent energy washed over her, a cold, greasy feeling that made her skin crawl. She took a deep, steadying breath and opened herself fully to her power, no longer resisting the darkness, but seeking to understand it. She saw it then. The corruption wasn't random. It was a pattern. A vast, intricate rune of despair that had been etched into the land using the forest's own life force as the ink. At the heart of the pattern, hidden deep within the woods, was a focal point, a nexus where the dark energy was being channeled and amplified. It was an altar desecrated with blood and that same black sap, and upon it sat a pulsating obsidian heartstone, the physical anchor for the spell. This was the source, and it was guarded, not by physical beasts, but by phantoms, echoes of the nightmares it had created, formless shapes of shadow and fear that slithered between the trees. Elara knew she could not destroy the Heartstone with force. That would only release the pent-up corruption in a catastrophic explosion. She had to unravel the spell. She had to heal the pattern. For hours she stood at the forest's edge, her body a statue, her mind a battlefield. She mapped the corrupt rune in her vision, tracing its vile lines. Then she began to weave, using her own light, her own connection to the ancient magic of the land. She began to stitch a counterspell. She didn't fight the black threads. She surrounded them with gold. Where the rune fostered fear, she wove courage. Where it bred isolation, she wove connection. Where it preached despair, she whispered of hope. It was a war of whispers, fought in a realm only she could see. The phantom nightmares assailed her, showing her visions of Theron falling, of the stronghold burning, of herself alone and powerless once more. Each was a dagger aimed at her resolve, but she had faced these fears before. She had lived them. And she had survived. She thought of Theron's trust. She thought of the grateful face of the young boy from the patrol they had saved. She thought of the two families who had chosen peace over feud. She focused on the bright, strong threads of her pack, and she wove them into her spell. Slowly, painstakingly, the golden light began to overtake the black. The weeping of the trees lessened, the black sap thinning to a clear. Healing resin. The oppressive silence was broken by the tentative chirp of a single bird. Back in the infirmary, one of the sleepers gasped and sat up, blinking in confusion. Elara, however, did not open her eyes. The final act required the most of her. The Heartstone, now isolated and surrounded by her light, pulsed frantically. She could not let it exist, drawing upon a deep well of power she hadn't known she possessed. She poured pure, concentrated life into the stone. There was no violent explosion. The obsidian Heartstone simply dissolved, turning to harmless dust, its captured energy released back into the forest as a gentle, cleansing rain. The spell was broken. Elara collapsed. Borin caught her before she hit the ground. She was unconscious for a full day, her body and spirit pushed to the absolute brink, when she awoke in a cot in Oakhaven. It was to the sound of birdsong and the joyful cries of reunited families. The forest outside the window was still scarred, but the green was returning to the leaves, and the air smelled of rain and fresh earth. Rowena was at her bedside, a look of profound respect on her face. "You did it, child. You healed the land." Elara felt a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, but beneath it was a solid core of certainty. She had faced the subtle, insidious weapon of their enemy and had not just survived, she had triumphed. She had proven that her power was not just for seeing threats, but for mending the world. As they prepared to return to the stronghold, hailed as saviors by the people of Oakhaven, Elara knew the victory was temporary. The Harbinger had tested their defenses and found them stronger than anticipated. He would try again, with something else. But she was no longer afraid of the dark. She had learned that the smallest light, if it is brave enough and true enough, can dispel the deepest shadow. The Queen had gone into the weeping woods and had taught them how to hope again. The return from Oakhaven was not a triumphal procession, but a quiet, solemn homecoming. There were no cheering crowds at the gate this time, only a deep, watchful silence from the pack members who had heard the whispers of what had transpired in the weeping woods. They saw their queen, pale and leaning slightly on Borin's arm, her body frail, but her spirit shining with a quiet, unassailable light. They saw the weary but hopeful faces of the guardians who had accompanied her. The story of the healed forest and the awakened sleepers had flown ahead of them, transforming the abstract concept of an oracle queen into a tangible living legend. Elara was immediately confined to her chambers by a fiercely insistent Rowena. The healer's usual gentle demeanor was gone, replaced by the stern authority of a physician who would brook no argument. The healer's usual gentle demeanor was gone, replaced by the stern authority of a physician who would brook no argument. "You have drained your life force to its dregs, child," Rowena scolded, mixing a potent, foul-smelling tonic. "Pushing your gift like that, it is not a muscle to be strained. It is the very essence of your soul. You will rest. You will eat. You will do nothing more strenuous than turning the pages of a book for at least a week. Or so help me, I will have the king sit on you." Elara was too exhausted to protest. The profound weariness was unlike anything she had ever known. It was not the satisfying ache of physical labor, but a hollowing out, as if she had poured a part of her own consciousness into the wounded forest. She slept for long, dreamless hours, the deep, healing sleep her body desperately craved. When she was awake, Theron was a constant presence. He did not speak of his fear or his initial opposition to her mission. He simply was there. He would read reports aloud to her in his calm, steady voice, his presence a solid anchor in the fog of her recovery. He brought her meals himself, his large warrior's hands surprisingly gentle as he arranged a tray. The mate bond between them, strained by their earlier argument, had not snapped. It had been tempered. It now thrummed with a new depth, a profound, wordless respect and a shared understanding of the burdens they each carried. During one of these quiet afternoons, as sunlight streamed through the window, he set aside a scroll and looked at her. The reports from Oakhaven are remarkable. The forest is recovering faster than anyone believed possible. New growth is already sprouting from the blighted areas. Fenwick says it's as if decades of healing have been compressed into days. It wanted to live, Elara said softly, her gaze distant. The land, it has its own spirit, Theron. The corruption was a foreign body, a sickness. I just helped its own immune system fight back. It was the only way she could describe the sensation of weaving her light with the innate life force of the timberlands. You did more than that, he replied. His voice low and earnest. You gave them back their hope. That is a currency more valuable than any army. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The pack, they see you differently now. It's one thing to be a queen born of prophecy and fate. It's another to be a queen who walks into a nightmare to pull her people out of it. You have earned a loyalty that runs deeper than tradition or fear. He was right. As Elara slowly regained her strength and began to walk the grounds again, she felt the change. The wary curiosity was gone, replaced by a genuine, heartfelt reverence. Wolves she didn't know would bow deeply, their eyes not downcast in fear, but lifted to meet hers with a spark of awe and gratitude. Mothers would gently push their children forward to curtsy or bow, whispering, "That's our queen. She banished the sadness from the woods." The incident had a ripple effect on the entire structure of the pack. The authority of the queen's guardianship was now unquestioned. When they spoke, they were listened to, their words carrying the reflected authority of the queen who had chosen them. The new council, once a contentious experiment, found a new cohesion. The story of Oakhaven became a parable of their new philosophy. Strength was not just in the arm that wields a sword, but in the will that heals the land and the heart that protects the helpless. One evening, a delegation from the Frostfang clan arrived, led by Alpha Caden's most trusted captain. They brought gifts of finely worked star iron and rare mountain herbs, but their true purpose was to reaffirm their alliance. A captain sought out Elara specifically. "Alpha Caden heard of your deeds in the western woods, Oracle Queen," the rugged warrior said, his voice respectful. "He said to tell you this. The mountain remembers. An ally who can mend a wounded forest is an ally worth following into the darkest night. Our forges are yours. Our warriors are yours." The message was clear. Her actions had not only solidified her rule at home, but had strengthened their most crucial alliance. She was becoming the symbolic heart of the resistance, a beacon that others were willing to rally around. Yet, with this newfound adoration came a new kind of weight. The pressure was no longer just to be a competent queen. It was to be the savior they all believed her to be. Every glance of hope, every word of praise was another thread in the mantle of expectation she now wore. She confided this fear to Theron one night as they looked out over the starlit stronghold. "They think I can fix anything," she whispered. "But what if I can't? What if the next threat is too great? What if I fail?" Theron was silent for a moment, his gaze also on the sleeping territory below. "Then we fail together," he said simply. "But listen to me, Elara. You are not a goddess. You are a leader. You showed them courage. You showed them that even the most terrifying darkness can be faced. That is the gift you have given them. Not a guarantee of victory, but the courage to fight for it. No one can ask for more from their queen." His words were a balm. He saw the person behind the legend, the woman who still felt like an imposter in a royal dress. He was not caught up in the myth-making. He was her partner, her balance. As her strength fully returned, Elara found her power had changed. It was not necessarily stronger, but it was more integrated, more a part of her. She didn't have to reach for it with such strenuous effort. It flowed more readily. Like a well-used muscle, she could now sense the general emotional state of the pack, a low hum of anxiety, underpinned by a newfound current of determination. She could walk through the gardens and feel the health of the plants, the contentment of the bees. Her connection to the world had become more intimate, more immediate. The victory in the Weeping Woods had been a crucible. It had forged her into a true ruler in the eyes of her people and had deepened the bond between her and Theron into an unbreakable partnership. The crown of the Silvermane Queen was no longer a foreign object placed upon her head. It had become a part of her, a crown of living stone shaped by trial and tempered by compassion. They had faced the Harbinger's subtle poison and had emerged stronger. But as they looked toward the eastern horizon, they both knew the next attack would not be so subtle. The whispers were over. The storm was coming. A fragile, precious peace settled over the Silvermane stronghold. It was not the oblivious peace of before, but a conscious, hard-won tranquility, like the steady breath taken before a plunge into deep water. The fields surrounding the fortress were a vibrant tapestry of green and gold. A harvest plentiful, a direct and tangible result of the land's restored health following Elara's intervention in the whispering timberlands. The forges still rang day and night, but the sound was no longer frantic, it was the rhythmic, determined heartbeat of a people preparing, not panicking. Elara found her rhythm as queen. Her mornings were spent in council, her afternoons with her guardianship, and her evenings in study or in quiet conversation with Theron. The pack had fully embraced her. The story of the servant girl turned savior queen was no longer a whispered scandal, but a foundational myth, a testament to the new era where worth was measured by deed. Not bloodline. Children now played a game called Oracle and the Blight, their laughter a sound that somehow fortified the walls more than any stone. One such evening, she and Theron walked along the high battlements, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of fire and amethyst. Below them, the stronghold was a scene of serene industry. The sounds of blacksmiths, the chatter from the market stalls, the distant howl of a pup on its first shift. It was the music of a people thriving, It's so normal, Elara murmured, leaning against the sun-warmed stone. It's easy to forget in moments like this what is coming. Theron stood beside her, his presence a solid comfort. This is what we are fighting for, he said, his gaze sweeping over the vibrant scene. Not for glory or for land, but for the right to have ordinary evenings, for the right for children to play without fear. He looked at her, his expression soft in the twilight. You gave them back this sense of safety, Elara. You reminded them what we are protecting. She smiled, a true, unburdened smile that reached her eyes. We, she corrected gently, we reminded them. The bond between them had settled into something profound and unshakable. It was a partnership forged in conflict and tempered by mutual respect. They were two halves of a single purpose. He was the shield, the unyielding strength, and she was the sword, the piercing truth. Together, they were the guardians of this peace. Later that night, in the deep quiet of the royal chambers, Elara sat before the fire. The haunting visions of the void had not returned, but a new, clearer knowing had taken its place. She didn't need a traumatic trance to understand the path ahead. Closing her eyes, she let her awareness expand. Not to search for threats, but to feel the whole of the territory she called home. She felt the strong, bright cord of Theron's life beside her, intertwined with her own. She felt the vibrant, interconnected web of the Silvermane pack. Threads of loyalty, friendship, and family shining with a fierce collective will. She felt the distant, steady pulse of the Frostfang clan in their mountains, a thread of iron and ice now woven firmly into their tapestry. She felt the recovered vitality of the whispering timberlands, a testament to resilience. And to the east, she felt it still, the vast, patient hunger. It was there, a blot on the edge of her perception. Waiting, but its presence no longer filled her with blind terror. Instead, it ignited a cold, clear flame of determination within her. They were no longer the unsuspecting prey. They were a united front. A territory forewarned and fortified, led by a king who had learned compassion and a queen who had mastered her fear. She opened her eyes, the reflection of the fire dancing in their golden fleck depths. Baron was watching her, having learned to read the subtle shifts in her expression. "What do you see?" he asked, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. Elara turned to him, her face serene, yet filled with a formidable strength. "I see us," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I see our people strong and unbroken. I see the long night ahead and the dawn we will fight to bring." She reached out, and he took her hand, their fingers lacing together perfectly. "The storm is coming, Theron, but we are the shelter, and we will not fall." In the heart of the northern wastes, under a canopy of endless stars, the stronghold stood as a beacon. The king and queen stood together, their bond a silent vow etched into the very stones around them. The future was a battle yet to be fought, but they were no longer a king facing his destiny, and a servant hiding from hers. They were partners. They were rulers. They were the steady flame in the growing dark. And they were ready. For the first time in her life, Elara knew with every fiber of her being that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The past was a ghost, the future a challenge. But this moment, this peace, this love, this was hers. and she would defend it with everything she had. The night deepened, calm and still. But within that calm was a promise, a gathering of strength, a sharpening of will. The calm before the storm was not an ending. It was a breath held, a promise whispered on the wind. The story of the Silvermane pack was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning.